Hello and welcome back everyone, we Online, and today I'm gonna continue the series What If Naruto Got the Maiden Harem Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
It would be an understatement to say Ellen was concerned as she sat next to the blonde shinobi's still unconscious body. 2 days have passed since Naruto lost consciousness once more during the second battle of the Orange Plains. Although Tigra was making good progress toward recovery, Lim scolded him for his carelessness when he regained consciousness the morning after the battle. The story of Naruto, however, was entirely different. According to the medical professionals, he was already fully recovered physically, but he hasn't moved, not even after a thin needle was inserted between his finger and nail. Even more perplexing was the fact that Naruto's breathing, heart rate, and bodily functions had slowed to the point where, if one wasn't paying close attention, one might assume he was dead. Ellen muttered his name, Naruto, for the 17th time in the last 20 minutes, excluding the previous ones. Meanwhile, Naruto's mental landscape, 385, exclaimed Kushina. Minato nodded as Naruto questioned, 385 what? Kushina responded, your girlfriend just muttered your name for the 385th time today. Naruto informed her, technically, she isn't my girlfriend. But she sees you as her boyfriend, so technically you are, said Kushina. Minato exclaimed, 241, huh? Naruto turned to face him, as did his mother. You had that conversation for the 241st time now, he replied. Then Kushina and Minato turned to face Naruto. What was all that was on Naruto's mind right now? While his mental processor was busy performing a mental defragmentation on his memories to make sure he remembered everything, or at least the majority of it, his mental buffer was still attempting to process the information his parents were giving him. 3 days in the mind, 3 minutes in reality, later. Naruto was relieved that his parents had finally been able to teach him about their combined fuinjutsu skills, even though his brain was at its breaking point. After the first battle with Roland, they had given up on teaching him their respective signature ninjutsu, Kushina's chakra chains and the Minato's Hiraishin. However, with the help of hundreds of clones, Kushina was able to improve Naruto's swordsmanship even further while also correcting the majority of his taijutsu flaws, which frequently left Naruto's mental avatar in worse shape than his physical body. Naruto was reminded once more of the reasons why mothers are frightening. In the meantime, Minato had abducted a number of Naruto's clones and attempted to teach them intermediate to advanced chakra control techniques. She also attempted to expand the number of elements that the clones could use. Minato was compelled to use a low-rank fuinjutsu 3 mental minutes into the training to keep the clone awake and focused. However, the drawbacks of this technique were that, when applied to someone like Naruto, he had to continuously reapply the seal because the clones continuously overpowered the seals. Minato eventually had to use a seal of medium to high rank. And now that their training was complete, with a very Anko-like smile and a knuckle crack, Kushina exclaimed, it's time for round 2. Naruto was momentarily more terrified than before, and he wondered if Anko had been his mother's covert intimidation apprentice. And it was evident, returning to reality, in the real world. Naruto began to shiver violently, so much so that Ellen could see the bed trembling, and she and her chair fell backwards. Ellen did the only thing she could think of at the time, screaming for assistance. Ellen was kneeling on top of Naruto in a very suggestive manner, with her hips right over his crotch and her face close to his, leaving less than an inch between their lips, when the medics entered the curtained area a short while later. Ellen practically screamed at the medics, calming their fears with her words and tone. He just started shaking and thrashing. Ellen was obviously concerned, but she wasn't attempting to harm Naruto. They went to assist her in restraint of the unconscious Naruto. When they felt Naruto relax, it briefly appeared as though they had succeeded. Naruto muttered, hair, arrow senin, jutsu, as his hair abruptly transformed into a huge, yellow, blonde hedgehog. Ellen mumbled, oh, after realizing how bad Naruto's hair was. Everybody, get down, she yelled as she jumped to the floor next to the bed. Ellen's scream arrived just in time, as the tent's roof and walls were transformed into, well, Emmental cheese before the medics had even touched the ground. Ellen swore on her life that she heard cries of agony from many people outside the tent as she watched in terror through narrowly open eyes as the hair needles ripped huge holes into the heavy canvas. Fortunately, the outburst was brief. One of the medics said, Lady Ellen, how did you know to warn us? Ellen blushed with shame. Shortly after the Battle of Alsace, I, tried to sleep with Naruto. The same medic said, "Oh, Kay, what does that have to do with this?" Ellen yelled at him, trying to sound like she was saying, "Look, there's a reason why he had a good night's sleep and I didn't, okay." A new voice said, "Oh, I haven't heard of this." When Ellen saw Sophia walk in, her face fell even more. The staff member brandishing the War Maiden said, "Come on, I am listening." There is no word to describe how Ellen's day had become a bit more complicated. No, embarrassing, definitely, humiliating. Naruto opened his eyes to see what all the commotion was about, but none of them saw it. He thought, this is going to be interesting. Two voices in the back of his mind concurred with him. One humiliating justification later, Sophia was laughing into her hand while the medics were dying of laughter, but none of it helped Ellen, who seemed to get redder by the second. She was now getting close to the atomic stage. She paused her laughter to ask, and what did Naruto say about that, before continuing. Naruto sat up and stretched his shoulders and back with audible cracks, saying, "I told her not to mind it, it was just a matter of bad timing on her part." All the others did was look at him. Ellen squeaked, "How long have you been awake?" Naruto gave her his trademark grin and remarked, "Since before you began your story." Sophia and those listening started laughing more vigorously, and Ellen felt her whole world ending. When Ellen attempted to lash out at Naruto, the word, "tried," was used, which made the laughter even louder. The increase in laughter wasn't caused by her tripping over her own foot and colliding with Naruto. Naruto petted Ellen's head and said, there, I am sure you missed me, Ellen-chan," in a calming voice. "Everything is all right. I am here. There is no need to cry." Later on, Ellen would be grateful that she passed out from embarrassment at that moment. His parents were laughing so hard that they were unable to breathe inside Naruto's head. "We need to inform the others," someone started. Naruto's tone made it hard to tell if he was serious when he said, "I will use you as target practice if you spread the news about what has happened here today. It has been a while since I have practiced my throwing arm." That was settled, though, when one poor guy started yelling, barely managing to get two words out before feeling something enter his ass. Everyone turned to see a handle protruding from his butt, along with a circular pommel with a hole in it. Naruto said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I threw a dummy knife by mistake," as he approached. In one agonizing motion, Naruto pulled it out, almost causing the man's eyes to fall out of their sockets. Naruto muttered absently, "I knew I should have taken the kunai from my right armband rather than my left." The local taverns would have run out of alcohol within an hour if it truly had the ability to make people forget. In the meantime, on the battlefield before turning to face a hill where Gerard Hughes and Olivier were debating where to bury their dead, Rurik yelled at a soldier who had sloppily dropped a bundle of arrows onto a pile, telling him to be more careful. When he saw the two, Rurik's eyes narrowed, but he let them be since he acknowledged that Gerard was much more skilled at negotiation and logistics than he was, even though it didn't mean he liked him. Rurik shook his head and went back to work, tidying up a massive mess. The SMA command tent that night. Aside from the conclusion, Roland, Tigra, Moshes, Hughes, Lim, and Sophia were seated around a table having a conversation, which is canon. Sophia asked Lim, who was seated beside her, "Say, what is keeping Ellen?" Silently, Lim said to her, "Don't know. A messenger from Regnitz suddenly showed up." "I see," Sophia uttered, realizing the secret message. "By the way," said Roland, "where is that young swordsman who managed to defeat me?" "Naruto?" inquired Tigra. "Last I heard of him he was packing his things for a long journey." According to Roland, "I see. I never expected to ever meet someone who could stand up to me in battle and come out alive, let alone defeating me whilst still recovering from a wound that should have been fatal. If you want, I can ask him to go and visit you before you break camp," Tigra said. Roland smiled and said, "I'd like that. In the tent with Ellen and Naruto." Ellen's eyes narrowed as she read the message that had arrived from Regnitz while Naruto packed his belongings to go back to Lightmeritz and forge a new sword. The following day, in silent prayer to their souls, Roland stood in front of the hundreds of graves containing the fallen knights of his order. He turned to go, promising, "I'll be back. I guess even for you it isn't easy to see comrades dying, isn't it?" he said, turning to face the questioner. Roland gave a silent nod. The individual said, "Tigra told me you wanted to talk with me." Roland replied, "That I did. Naruto Uzumaki." They began talking about their lives, what motivated them to pick up a sword, and a secret agreement they had made that neither of them hoped would need to be implemented anytime soon. In the meantime, Ellen and Naruto are in their tent. After fastening Arifar's belt, Ellen addressed Tigra, who was standing behind her. I need to go back to ZHCTED for a bit, she replied. Tigra gasped, not anticipating that. Huh? There is a good friend, a war maiden like me, to whom I am indebted, Alexandra Alshaven, my mentor after becoming a war maiden. Ellen informed him. Ellen examined the message in her hands, specifically the signature at the bottom, and said, I call her Sasha. Regnitz, which Sasha governs, is under attack by another war maiden. I have to defend her. Defend her? Inquired Tigra. Ellen glanced at him and said, We took an oath. Ellen's face softened as she started to inform Tigra about Sasha's condition, and Tigra's took on an expression of understanding. Whenever danger befalls either of us, we will come running, even if it means discarding all else. Afterwards Lim questioned her friend and leader, Lady Eleonora. Are you sure you don't want me to accompany you? Ellen assured her, it will be all right. In addition, Naruto will accompany me. Besides, someone needs to keep Tigra safe, right? Lim nodded and blushed a little before turning to face Tigra and Sophia as they said their goodbyes. She didn't know why, but for some reason she felt that she would soon have to battle for Tigra's possession. By the time Roland rode to Nice to meet the king, the Knightly Order of Navarre had already departed. According to the clones he left behind, Naruto had already departed for Lightmerits. Lim gave a headshake. She somehow believed that the shinobi would make their situation more challenging. If only she were aware that he had started those chains a long time ago. At noon 2 days later, the soldiers on patrol in the area around the capital of Lightmerits couldn't figure out why smoke was coming from the forge Naruto had constructed during his previous visit. They moved toward the building slowly. They stormed in at the leader's order, only to regret not taking off their armor first. The first person outside yelled, Shit, that place is hot, and hastily took off his armor. The second one said, You don't fucking say, and the others agreed as soon as they were unclad. A fresh voice said, I apologize for not giving you any notice. They turned to see Naruto leaving the forge while dressed as a blacksmith. But the boss was short on time and needs to regroup with Ellen Chan as soon as possible. The soldiers said, Boss? Naruto remarked, Oh, I am one of his clones. Oh, was given by the soldiers as if they understood, but in fact, they understood nothing at all. 0, zilch, null, nix, 1. Before vanishing inside the forge, the clone remarked, Oh, and you may want to alert the city that Ellen and roughly 3,000 of her knights will be back in a few days. One of the soldiers questioned, How can that guy survive in there wearing those clothes? No bloody idea, said someone else. The leader informed them, Anyway, we'd better return and alert everyone in the city. I don't think that this place need any protection. The second in command muttered, True, but I'd like to see the faces of the bandits in this area when they try to enter that forge. The others concurred. A little further away, getting closer to the forge. When a woman sneezed out loud, everyone around her turned to stare at her. She whispered, Hay fever, alongside Naruto. While working the steel into a new sword, Naruto was experiencing excruciating pain from a seal on his arm. He went outside, gave the hammer to a clone, bit his thumb, ran through a couple of hand seals, and drew a line of blood over the seal. Kachiyose no jutsu, he uttered, forcefully hitting the ground with his hand. A big man who resembled a pickled cucumber emerged with a huge puff of smoke. Well, you look like shit, Naruto said, glancing at the creature he had just called a ghost. Later on in the day, Naruto swore loud about people interrupting him as the door was flung open. He noticed a number of bandit-clad individuals entering the room before fainting from the heat or the ki that Naruto was hurling at them out of annoyance. The guards arrived within an hour to pick up the bandits after he sent a clone to inform them. It appears that their leader, a woman with a rack that would have made Lim envious, had a sizable bounty on her head, and Naruto had no idea where to put the 300 gold and 3,000 silver coins. After 3 days the people cheered and cried with delight as Ellen and her army rode into the city. A ramen vendor would occasionally cry out in relief, saying, the ramen monster would now be calmed down. She waved and greeted her people as she rode by, and she was relieved that she wasn't physically surrounded. Ellen-sama, how are you? How are things with Naruto-san? Have you conquered Brune? Where is Limalisha-sama? How is that cute archer? Ellen did what Naruto once advised her to do because the questions were so numerous and varied. Smile at them, wave your hand, and otherwise keep quiet and ignore them. She instructed herself to send Naruto's forge a pot of ramen as a thank you present, for the advice, that is. After calling for the army to gather inside her castle and explaining why, she asked where Naruto was. She raised her eyebrows when she was informed that he had captured one of ZHCTED's most wanted criminals without a fight, at least according to the report. She went to see the female criminal in the dungeon. When she first saw her, she thought Lim would be jealous. And when she inquired about Naruto's location, the man she appointed to lead her during her campaigning trip didn't finish before she sprinted in the direction of the stables. I think he is still at his forge. Later, the stable master claimed to have witnessed Ellen's antics cause the horse she was riding to shake its head. After 45 minutes before the horse had even stopped moving, Ellen leapt off it and exploded through the door, only to be struck by a wall of heat. Her clothes quickly felt like they were on fire, so she ripped them off without thinking, leaving only her loincloth. As she glanced around, she noticed Naruto kneeling close to the heat source. In order to ensure that the clay-covered blade heated evenly for the quench, Naruto was busy drawing the blade in and out of the fire. There was a tub of oil next to him that was a mixture of grease and charcoal powder, which he would surely use for the quench. After a while, Ellen started to perspire a lot, but she said nothing. She finally witnessed Naruto thrust a glowing mass of metal and clay into the oil after pulling it out. She watched with interest as the blade assumed the shape of Naruto's old blade, bending first in the direction of the edge and then backward. Naruto looked at her and said, "Oh, Ellen-chan." He got up and said, "I didn't notice you were there. And what is with that dress code?" She was relieved that the room was warm because it concealed her intense blush, and she wanted to beat the living daylights out of him. When he opened the windows and doors and let the cool air into the room, she let out a sigh of relief. Naruto said to her, "Well, you might want to get dressed before people notice you." He assumed that the redness on her face was caused by the heat, which also warmed her muscles enough for her to move so quickly. He had no idea that women could get dressed faster than it took Kakashi-sensei to discover that Naruto had stolen his Icha Icha book as a practical joke some time ago, though it didn't take him long to notice. One of Ellen's questions later, "Are we finished now?" inquired Naruto. "Aye." Ellen kissed him to silence him. "One last question. How is it you could breathe in here with all of the doors and windows closed?" she said. Not really lying, Naruto created a small barrier using some of the seals his drill sergeant from Hell Parents taught him. "Oh, one of my abilities. Allows me to filter the air of most unnatural substances, such as smoke and stale air." Ellen inquired, "And how long are you still going to stay here?" Naruto grinned at her and asked, "What happened to one last question?" Ellen gave him a light shoulder punch. After making a few clones to finish the blade, Naruto decided to take a break. Ellen then practically dragged him into the tiny room next to the forge, where he had constructed a small bedroom in case he needed to take a break during the forging process. He could rest, he'd just make some clones to continue. When she saw the condition of the tiny room, or more accurately, the bed, she lost the will to do anything more than kiss. Naruto said, Ellen-chan, why are we here?" Ellen whispered, wrong door," and pulled him through the door. Naruto deadpanned, saying, "Could have told you that." Ellen made the decision to remain silent about the situation. Why was Naruto always complicated? "Mom, Dad, are you certain of her intentions?" Naruto pondered. He heard Minato yelling in his mind, Kushina, don't do it. Stop talking." The sound of his mother's voice replayed in his mind. "Nin fuinjutsu uzumaki. Muausamasu baka." Naruto prepared himself in his mind for whatever his mother's "wake up idiot" technique might do to him, but it didn't work. Huh? Was that meant to accomplish something? Naruto questioned his mom. "Let it rest for a few hours. I last employed this method to help that Haishibaka realize that." Minato most likely clamped a hand over his mother's mouth to cut her off. Naruto thought, I guess you didn't know that guy turned into a bit of an ass before either of them could speak. "That's why Kushina employed this method," Minato remarked. "Obviously, it didn't work. Do you think I'm a jerk?" Naruto pondered. "No," through Minato's hand, Kushina was able to say, "It just makes people grow up a bit faster." "I'll grow taller than I am now, then?" Naruto questioned them. In his mind, he believed he heard two objects fall to a stone floor. After an hour, the Light Merit's archers were practicing their skills at the training area, which Ellen and Naruto were approaching. Although there was some hesitancy with the second name, several of them greeted the pair with, Lady Ellen, Naruto." "Relax, I guess you have all heard about what I am by now, right?" replied Naruto. Everybody who listened nodded. "Well, I guess there is nothing I can do to make you trust me as before. Do you mind if I use the range for a bit?" They all gave him the all clear and nodded. After thanking them, Naruto moved to one of the squares that marked the archer's shooting positions and eliminated a number of kunai and shuriken. The archer beside him questioned, "Are you really going to throw those from over here?" Naruto said, "Yup. Got a problem with that?" According to the archer, not really. A voice interrupted Naruto just as he was about to throw. Naruto turned to see an archer gathering bags of coins as if a wager were being placed. "Hold up, Naruto. Wait a few moments please. 20 silver that he doesn't hit the target, 25 silver on the same. 18 silver, 23 bronze that he doesn't hit the target." It appeared that only one person had bet on him to win out of the many who had placed bets. Someone remarked, "Naruto will hit the bullseye." Ellen set a rather large bag on the table, its contents clinking as it fell, and everyone turned to watch her. Lady Ellen, the distance between him and the target is about 150 alsons. While that is not an impossible throwing distance, to hit the bullseye is next to impossible, someone replied. Ellen suppressed a smirk as she remarked, "My loss if he doesn't manage it then." Naruto said in a frustrated tone, "Can I start?" Ellen called her over and said, "Go for it." Naruto yelled, finally, as he launched the first kunai. It passed through the bullseye instead of landing on it, leaving a hole where the red circle had been. Naruto noticed that the kunai was lodged in the pillar behind it. Naruto scratched the back of his head and said, "Oops. I think I threw it a bit too hard. Meh, who cares?" Naruto hadn't even reached the shurikens yet when the other targets soon suffered the same fate as the first. "You really didn't think I'd bet that much on a hunch, right?" Ellen responded. When a crumbling sound was heard, many people's faces were dejected. The soldiers in the area were left wondering how hard Naruto could throw after the pillars he had struck started to collapse a short while later. Oh, if only they were aware of the effects that wind chakra has when applied to a blade, or some of his recently unlocked lightning chakra, too. Naruto scratched the back of his head once more and remarked, "Okay. I really should have held back on those throws." Naruto felt the strange sensation he had been experiencing for some time, but it seemed to be intensified when he looked at Ellen. "This is what love is, Mom, Dad?" he asked in his head. Indeed, indeed, the response arrived. "What aspects of her appeal to you?" his father inquired. Naruto started to say, "Well, she has very pretty hair," but stopped when he heard his mother laughing uncontrollably. "Minato is unquestionably your son," she remarked. "Huh?" Naruto inquired. "Why wouldn't I be?" His father also laughed and remarked, "Kushina, he is unquestionably your son. Anything else?" Naruto went on, "Well, she does have a nice face and large breasts." "You've been with Jiraiya-sensei for too long," Minato whispered. Both parents laughed when Naruto said, "I think a better name would be Ero Sennin." However, this time, the laughter sounded more like nostalgia than humor. Bewildered, Naruto chose to question them afterwards. Ellen was currently coming toward him and once again demonstrated to the local females that Naruto was not allowed there. However, she was about to have a startling experience when Naruto kissed her back for the first time. However, those observing were unable to see that because Ellen was holding Naruto so tightly that his arms were somewhat stuck to his sides. They did observe that a large number of their fellow observers had blood streaming from their noses and tears streaming down their eyes. 1. Would you like me to go on? 2. According to my understanding, the Hiraishin no Jutsu is a combination of Fuinjutsu and lightning-based jutsu. While lightning and earth are only at a beginner's level, Naruto can use fire and water at a respectable level, and he truly mastered wind during the training in hell. Part 1 of Chapter 14. Invasion somewhere along Olmutza's southern edge. The man alerted the nearby patrol by deliberately stepping on a dry twig to announce his presence. He chose to show that he didn't want to fight by walking out of cover with his hands up rather than hiding. One of the soldiers demanded, "Who are you?" "A man who carries a message for Lady Ludmilla Lowry from one Naruto Uzumaki," he replied. A short girl wearing blue clothes and light blue hair stepped forward and asked, "Really? And what does that jackass want of me?" "Well," the man said, hurling his black hair aside. Mila recognized him, and her eyes widened. With her spear in hand, she practically yelled, "What the fuck are you doing here?" SMA camp in Brune. The Silver Meteor Army received a significant influx of men and supplies after defeating the Order of Navarre. These came primarily from the nobles who had received letters from Moshes and Hughes, as well as from a few lesser nobles whose people had suffered greatly as a result of Ganelon and Thénardier's actions. The tragic news of a Mujinellan invasion to the south and Roland's death at the hands of Ganelon reached Moshes a few days after the second battle. The only neighboring nation with a system of slavery in place was Mujinellan, and it was an absurdly extensive one at that. They would repeatedly engage in rape, slaughter, and plunder while invading other nations at will and without prior notice. Brune just so happened to be their target this time, but they change their target whenever they feel like it. Additionally, Brune currently had little to no means of dealing with the invaders because of the civil war. Tigra declared, "I have made my decision." Everyone's eyes were on him. Tigra declared, "I will go and fight the invaders." "What?" inquired Lim. Rurik and Tita were not far behind. "If we don't stop the Mujinellan invasion, they will eventually reach Alsace," Tigra stated to them. "I do not intend to take our remaining ZHCTED forces with me, as this is technically not their fight." Rurik interrupted Tigra to say, "Well, I for one will follow you. And don't give me the, 'you don't have to come' bullshit." "And I will also come. I promised Ellen to keep you out of trouble," Lim replied. Masha's teased, "Ah, you just don't want to leave your boyfriend, right? And don't you dare tell me not to go," Tita said, her cheeks swelling. "I am not a soldier and thus you cannot order me not to go." "Well, we do need her," Rurik said, shocking everyone in the room. "The Mujinellan invasion force is sure to have several SLA prisoners with them who are scared. With how cute she is, she could calm them down." Tita was unsure whether to interpret his remarks as a compliment or an insult. Masha's and Hughes expressed their own worries about Ganelon's potential threat and sadly told Tigra that they couldn't assist him in this battle. Both Ganelon and Thénardier could attack them without repercussions because they were labeled traitors for aiding Tigra after he was declared a traitor. They needed to protect their own territory. Tigra let out a sigh, anticipating this. "Then that just leaves the issue on how many are coming with us," said Tigra. "I'd like word to spread amongst the troops about this invasion. Tomorrow, all those who still wish to fight, even if the odds are against us like at the moment, are to form up on the plains south of the camp." Masha's agreed with Hughes when he said, "Very well. Do we know how many there are in the invasion?" Lim inquired. "Nothing certain yet, but initial reports suggest somewhere between 15 and 25,000, Masha stated. Everyone in the tent drooped a little as a result. Unknown time later Tita called out to Tigra as she approached his private tent. At this hour of the day, she was shocked to hear him answer. As she walked in, he said, "Oh, Tita, you are still up this late?" Intrigued by this new development, Tita informed him, "It is already morning, you know." She only remembered conversing with Tigra at this hour of the morning when she went hunting with him. The map on the ground in front of him then caught her attention. 4 figures, Ganelon, Thénardier, Tigra, and the Mujinellan invaders, were standing on it, each representing a different power that is currently in Brune. Tita practically told Tigra to eat breakfast after unpacking the basket she was carrying on the table. A groan escaped from the sleeping area of the tent, and a still drowsy Lim wobbled in shortly after. Tita, what are you doing here this late?" she said. "It is just past sunrise, actually, and I brought food for the two of you," said Tita. This completely awakened Lim. "I never thought I'd live to see the day that Tigra would be up this early," she stated. Tita informed her, he never went to bed in the first place. He was up all night, planning. Lim remained silent and dressed, muttering something along the lines of, "No wonder I was so cold." A couple of hours later Tigra turned to face the field. A good 2,500 members of the current SMA had assembled before him, and that number was steadily increasing. Tigra could not have asked for more. The majority of the remaining ZHCTED troops joined him, which shocked him. A few days later, mountains in the south Tigra, Rurik, and 2 other people were staring down at the lines of prisoners and the horde of invasion troops as they marched, or, in the case of the latter, staggered, through the canyon. Tigra remarked, "There are too many for us to attack head-on." Rurik joked, "You don't say. What gave it away?" The scouting party's other 2 members grinned. "Do I need to use this?" Tigra considered this while glancing at his bow. "No, I'm still unable to control its power." "Let's go back before any of them spot us up here," Tigra replied. The other 3 gave a nod. "By the way, why did we have to bring that jerk Gerard along with us? Shouldn't he have remained in Territoire and helped defend his home?" Rurik asked after they had successfully gotten a safe distance away from the invading army. "Well, for one, he is good with logistics, figures and numbers as you were with weapons. Without his help, this army would run out of supplies within weeks," said Tigra. "It is thanks to him that I could focus more on the battle against Roland." "That may be true, but there is still something about him that I don't like," said Rurik. Tigra started, "Hey now, let's all get along with each other. but his hunter instinct took over and his hearing significantly improved. Footsteps? He questioned inaudibly. He and the others were standing above another ravine a few moments later, but this one was much narrower and much smaller than the one through which the Mujinellan invasion force was advancing. His eyes widened as he peered around the rock and saw a cloaked figure running from 4 Mujinellan soldiers who were right on her heels. The figure appeared to be female based on the way it ran. Abruptly, the girl fell on her face after tripping over a rock. The soldiers were all around her in an instant, laughing vilely. Sheathing his sword, one of them started to undo his belt. An arrow passed through his temple and through his helmet, sending him to the next life without even causing him any pain. Just as the now dead body had hit the ground, more arrows shot through the air, striking the other 3 soldiers and piercing their skulls and helmets. When she looked around and saw the 4 dead bodies, the woman stood up and was obviously perplexed by what had happened. In fact, she was so preoccupied with figuring out what had happened that she failed to notice the Tigra coming up behind her. Tigra's question, "Are you all right?" jolted her out of her daze. She stepped back from him right away, then spun around so Tigra could see her dazzling blonde hair and turquoise eyes. Tigra had the faintest sense of recognition for her, but it was so slight that he wrote it off as a fleeting glimpse of her on one of his father's outings. Tigra, demonstrating his lack of animosity, dropped to one knee upon seeing her defensive and distrustful expression. He said, "You don't need to be afraid. I'm Tigra Vormudvorn. I'm a Brunman." He briefly noticed a look of surprise on her face before a smile appeared. She said, "Tigra, Vermud," and Tigra was taken aback to hear that she recognized him, as though she had known him before. But she passed out, so that had to wait. He stumbled forward and just about caught her. He eventually called out to Rurik, "Hey Rurik, come give me a hand." Later that night, Tigra's camp in the command tent, Tigra, Lim, Rurik, and Gerard were listening to Gerard's inventory report. Each bowman receives 56 arrows. I made sure each cavalryman got 12 stones, and each soldier got 5, but for a large-scale battle, that won't last the whole fight. Gerard continued. "Supplies," mumbled Tigra. Gerard looked up from the paper he was holding and said, "There's one more problem. The Mujinellan force has with them our people, whom they have enslaved. If they use them as shields, we won't be able to strike at them." Tigra said, "Understood." In the meantime, Lim sensed Tigra's internal turmoil at the most recent piece of information. The following morning at sunrise, the Mujinellan army. There was a brief respite from the cramped path as the Muozinellan army emerged from the ravine and entered a region where many other ravines joined this one. The army commander remarked, "It's almost sunup." One of the soldiers beside him, kneeling, said, "General, sir. The enemy has arrived. They appear to be a Brunish army." "How many?" inquired the general. The soldier stated, "Between 100 and 200. They are all cavalrymen. But they are keeping their distance, and attacking our left flank with stones and arrows." The general declared, "Send 3,000 spearmen to eradicate them." The soldier questioned, "Wouldn't 500 be sufficient? Isn't 3,000 far too great a number?" The general remarked, "The horsemen are just a decoy, hit their main force." As he prepared to issue the orders, the soldier said, "Yes, sir." The general thought to himself, if their decoy is 200, their main force is 2,000. Time skipping okay, so the little force was a decoy. Leading elements were greeted by the sight of the main force as the 200 or so cavalry led the pursuing Mujinellan force into a very narrow ravine. The front attempted to flee, running straight into the rear guard, believing there were between 5,000 and 6,000 of them. This caused a great deal of chaos among their ranks, which only got worse when Tigra shot the commanding officers from the customary 300 altitude range. The SMA then charged into the confusion, destroying the enemy as if they were a group of insane fanatics. In summary, the battle was short and bloody. Later on, although there were some Brunish and ZHCTED soldiers among the dead, the majority of the dead were invaders. Tigra rode among them. He looked up at the rest of his army and said, "The first battle went well enough." Which proved to be nothing more than dummies constructed and dressed so that they blended in with the morning sky. In due haste, Rurik and the other soldiers quickly began salvaging everything they could, gathering the spears and adding them to their own cache while putting the arrows in quivers without first cleaning them. Additionally, some of the armor was salvaged because it was still functional but would need to undergo a color change before being distributed to the troops who required it. As a result, Tigre used a number of fairly effective hit-and-run strategies against the invading force over the course of the following few days, gradually reducing their numbers. The Mujinellan General Qasim attempted to thwart Tigre's actions on the third day. One of the Mujinellan officers stood in front of a group of slaves who were kneeling on the ground and yelled, "You cowardly Brunnish soldiers, crawling around like worms while hiding behind rocks. We will not put up with your petty tricks forever. If you choose to conceal yourselves, this is what happens." Screams of agony briefly followed the sound of spears being thrown into bodies as it reverberated throughout the canyon. Qasim said, "Forward." By dividing his army into 3 divisions, a vanguard of 3,000 under his command, the main force, and the rear guard, Qasim had changed the marching formation. He was adamant that a direct attack was not a possibility. However, when his vanguard came into contact with the Silver Meteor Storm, which numbered about 600, his expectations were once again completely off the mark. Many were glad to be able to confront them at last, but Qasim was taken aback to discover that Tigre, an archer, was in charge of an army of soldiers from a nation known for disapproving of bow use. He was about to give the order for his archers to open up with a barrage of arrows when he snapped out of his shock and heard a fresh war cry come from their flank. The Mujinellan soldiers were completely taken aback when they saw Zhcted's banners. Both groups took full advantage of the invasion army's shaky ranks as they charged into the Mujinellan ranks. Tigre aimed his bow at Qasim before he could muster his troops, but he was unfrightened because it was more than 300 alsans away. He obviously had no idea who Tigre was. Following Qasim's death, the Mujinellan troops started to retreat, abandoning the slaves along with their supplies and weapons. While Gerard dealt with the released prisoners, Tigre ordered Lim and Rurik to lead the chase. That night Tigre stared at the sizable contingent of released inmates, unsure of what to do, particularly since she was feeling bad about being held accountable by one of them for the deaths of some of their friends. Gerard expressed his opinion, saying, "We have no choice but to send them to Territoire. There's no other way." Lim called over, "Tigre." She exclaimed, "We have a problem." A few seconds later, "An advance party," exclaimed Gerard incredulously. "Yes. All the prisoners we took said the same thing. We are just the forerunners," Rurik replied. "If they are an advance party, what about the main force?" Tigre inquired. "Well, about that," Rurik started, unsure of how to present that fact. "They number 30.000. Lim's response was direct. 30.000, exclaimed Tigre. "If they join up with the survivors of the advance group, then it won't be today or tomorrow, but in several days we can expect roughly 40.000, said Gerard. "And the men and women are being worn out by the repeated engagements," said Tigre. "Not to mention the 2.000 civilians we saved." Meanwhile, getting closer to where their little strawberry blonde girl in pink said, "Nay, Ice Nay San," to the blue-clad girl with sky-blue hair at her side. "Are we sure we can trust the words of that blonde bastard? Or that scary old man who delivered the bastard's message?" Mila said, "Stop calling me that, Olga." The black-haired man in heavy armor riding behind them caught her attention. "And Naruto may be a jackass and a bastard, but he is definitely not a liar. As for the old man," she said, "he is a knight whose honor prevents him from lying in general." Olga pouted at the man, making even Mila think, "Cute, I know that Lady Ludmila Lowry here has engaged Naruto in combat once before, but what about you, young girl?" the man asked. "He is a disrespectful bastard who dissed me and made fun of me, then managed to defeat me in a duel," she stated, "and I am not a young girl, I am 14. Midday the following day, because of the fatigued and injured, the SMA was moving very slowly. Tigre was a little alarmed by this, and his suspicions were validated when a scout rode up and reported that a group of 3,000 to 4,000 Mujinellan knights were approaching. Tigre ordered every horseman to follow him in an attempt to slow the advancing Mujinellan cavalry, leaving Rurik and Lim in command of the main group. They soon encountered the aforementioned cavalry, but they quickly found that their volleys had no effect whatsoever on slowing the charging cavalry. Less than 100 ascents from Tigre, the charging cavalry stopped, and everyone was looking at what had happened. They were being approached at a trot by a massive force of knights. At first, Tigre thought they were more enemies, but when he saw Zhcted's standard and one of the other two, a primarily white banner with 2 blue spears on it, his mild horror turned to surprise. Before he could finish speaking, the Zhcted cavalry smashed into the Mujinellan cavalry like a hammer against a piece of glass, moving from a trot to a canter and then a gallop. The result was essentially predetermined, but Tigra barely had time to order his men to charge as well before the Mujinellan cavalry launched their counterattack. After a short, brutal battle, Tigra turned to the woman who had said, "It has been a while, Count Tigravormud Vorn." Tigra told the majority of his troops, who appeared somewhat tense, the Principality of Olmutz's Snow Princess of the Frozen Ripple, Ludmila Lowry. Startled, Tigra turned to face the black-haired man behind her. "What? How?" he cried out. "It has been a while, Tigra. You can thank Naruto for my survival, though if you don't mind, I'd like to have a crack at Ganelon's neck before you do anything to him," the man replied with a grin. Tigra then looked at the girl next to them who was wearing a pink outfit. He said, "I didn't know that ZHCTED allowed small young girls to enter their armed forces," and the black-haired man, who had experienced a similar reaction upon meeting the young Venadis, started laughing. The girl began pouting and then started giving Tigra the, "I am 14 years old, and I am a Venadis as well," lectures before concluding with the, "Thank the blonde bastard for her help," lecture. "Mo, why do Pinky here and old man Roland here have to be so mean?" she asked. 1. Being called Pinky caused Tigra's eyebrows to twitch a little, but he couldn't blame her for the moniker because it accurately reflected the color of his hair. "Well, now that the greetings are over with," Olga responded, "where are Breezy Ne Sama and Booby Ne Chan?" Tigra questioned, "Huh?" as Mila tried not to laugh. She explained, "She means Eleonora and Limalisha." "Oh, well, Ellen is back in ZHCTED with Naruto while Lim is leading the main group together with the refugees," Tigra replied. "Are Eleonora and the bastard still oblivious to each other's feelings?" asked Mila. "Well, there is definitely something going on between them, but when they left it was still only Ellen trying to make the moves on Naruto," Tigra clarified. "With someone as strong as Naruto, I am surprised that he doesn't have girls swarming all over him," Roland said. Tigra inquired, "You have met Ellen before, right?" In response, Roland said, "More like fought her. She is a proud and honorable warrior, I'll give her that. Amongst the best sword wielders I have met, other than Naruto." That was not the topic of the conversation, Tigra and Mila reasoned. Olga, meanwhile, was too preoccupied with examining Tigra's pink hair to give the conversation any attention. She wanted to know how she would appear wearing that hair as a wig. Returning to the main group fearing something had happened to Tigra, Lim shuddered. She left Rurik in command and rode off, hoping Tigra was okay, and following the tracks. 1. And it has been disclosed who the unidentified man is. Additionally, as you will all read later, I chose to keep Roland alive because it helps to explain some of the events that will occur in the future. Chapter 15, Naruto. The time-tested strategies are still effective. 1 week after Ellen and Naruto departed, Regnitz. "So, Ellen, tell me more about this Sasha buddy of yours," Naruto replied. Right now, the two of them were jogging, or riding, through Regnitz's streets in the direction of the main castle. A sizable army with Lightmerit's banners, who had joined Ellen and Naruto to assist Regnitz in its current predicament, was camped outside the walls. Remembering a time when she and Mila had come here to visit Sasha, Ellen told him, well, when she was still active, she was strong enough to take on both me and Mila at the same time and win without breaking a sweat, though that is mostly because, as with Roland, the two of us have no experience facing a dual wielder. A fight almost broke out between them, but Sasha intervened, telling them that if they were successful in defeating her, she would do whatever they asked her to do for a day. The two of them charged at her without thinking because they were more arrogant than intelligent at the time. Unlike Sophia, who only gives them short-term growth spurts, Mila and Ellen got off on a light toasting that day, unlike some of the times when Sasha broke up a fight between them. Naruto changed the topic and inquired, and what exactly does Regnitz specialize in? Regnitz is more of a jack of all trades, but in the eyes of the other principalities it is the trade hub of the kingdom, connecting trade routes from both land and the sea, Ellen informed him. Is that why the castle looks like an oversized merchant's office? He inquired. Ellen chuckled. She wiped away her tears at the sentimental memories and remarked, I asked the same thing the first time I was here. Not long after Naruto and Ellen were led by an aide to Shasha's quarters, which were located in a bright hallway close to the main conference room. After a few seconds, the aide knocked on the door and opened it, letting Ellen and Naruto enter the room. They saw a brunette inside, whose hair color was similar to Hinata's, but she had shorter hair and lacked the pale eyes. Joe. Sorry for making you come all the way here, she replied. She wasn't shy and timid like Hinata had been, and Naruto could tell right away. Ellen stated, that was our agreement. Sasha remarked. The little ones are thrilled to see you. With an eye toward Naruto, Sasha questioned, by the way, who is this? Oh, right, this is, Ellen started, but Naruto cut her off. Naruto introduced himself as, Sup. Name's Naruto Uzumaki. Wandering swordsman and ass-kicking mercenary working under Ellen-chan. Ellen heard Sasha laughing just as she was about to chastise him. I can tell that he is an easygoing and caring person. Are you two a couple? Asked Sasha. No, yes. Naruto and Ellen's simultaneous responses, respectively, made Sasha smile, and what followed only made her smile wider. Ellen was shocked and asked, What do you mean we are not yet a couple? Where I come from, one can only officially call it a couple after the first date, Naruto replied. The first what? Inquired Ellen. Sasha was making a concerted effort to contain her laughter. Naruto reiterated, the first date. Ellen questioned, date? What does this have to do with the date? Sasha interrupted any more discussion by erupting into uncontrollable laughter, tears welling in her eyes. Ellen, the date he refers to probably is the same as courting, Sasha responded. Ellen gave Naruto a look. She was informed by him what she said, whatever she said. Ellen questioned, so sleeping together cannot be called a date? No, training together. No, Ellen attempted a number of other options that she and Naruto had worked through together, but Sasha consistently gave the same response. Ellen sobbed on the ground. We have finally gotten to the part where Naruto returns the kiss, and we still are not a couple, as Sasha and Naruto chuckled at the screen. Sasha said, Say, Naruto-san, are you not depressed by this? Not really, I only began understanding my feelings a few weeks ago and had determined my feelings for Ellen a few days ago, shortly before we left Light Merits, Naruto replied. Pity you came here only at this time. Had you come a few years earlier, I'd have snatched you away from Ellen, Sasha laughed. Sasha said, still not a couple, but Ellen was too preoccupied with her depression to listen. Ellen said, Hey, Ellen, as she looked up to see Naruto kneeling in front of her. Before she could respond, he was kissing her. Sasha cheered the performance, but she was a little envious of the white head because she could see Naruto was a very attractive man. How about once this business here in Regnitz is over, I take you on a date? Asked Naruto. The words took some time to register, but when they did, Ellen's innumerable kisses and bear hug were making Naruto gasp for air. Upon Ellen's relaxation, Sasha remarked, Well, I hope for the best for the two of you. Since at least one person had blessed their relationship, and a once powerful one at that, Ellen and Naruto exchanged a smile at that moment. Well, back to where we were, let's talk about the rude jerk who has set foot in this land, Ellen inquired. The Flash Princess of the Thunder Swirl, Yelizaveta Femina, Sasha replied. Ellen became irate for a moment. Conversely, Naruto, who? The bitch dressed in purple clothes and the different colored eyes, Ellen clarified. The two Venattis started to perspire when Naruto asked, Oh, that one, who is she again? Ellen asked Sasha, what pretense is she using to march soldiers? After providing Naruto with a succinct and direct explanation of the person they were discussing once more. Yelizaveta was apparently marching under the guise that Sasha's fleet had pushed the majority of the pirate ships that were battling them in the direction of Yelizaveta's fleet during a recent joint naval battle against pirates. Unfortunately, since Sasha's admiral was among the dead, there is no way to verify that such an order was issued. By the time the topic of their dragon gears came up, Naruto had dozed off and was using Ellen's lap as a pillow. After 2 days, close to Boroslo, a woman with pink hair sat on her horse and looked out over a valley. A knight roared, Lady War Maiden, as he approached her on horseback. A report from our scouts. There's a force of approximately 4,000 to the south. She inquired, under what banner? According to the knight, 2 of them. Paired swords on a yellow field, and a silver flash on black. She exclaimed, So you are here, Ellen. Both armies were soon positioned across from one another, with Yelizaveta commanding her own army and Ellen leading the combined Regnitz Leitmeritz army. Naruto, with his sword at the ready, was standing next to Ellen. The orders to charge were given shortly after, almost simultaneously, with Ellen charging towards Yelizaveta and calling for the Regnitz commander to take control while Naruto vanished at a high speed to an unknown location. The conflict between Liza and Ellen is must-see. Alongside Naruto, Naruto was taken aback by how quickly he came upon the enemy. It appears that his mother and father's Tordu training had paid off. However, the enemy soldiers were far more shocked than he was, seeing only a blur before spotting a mop of yellow hair among their ranks. Naruto said in a bored voice, Listen here, guys, if possible, I'd rather not want to kill anyone today, so please return to your camp. No one moved or even paid attention to what he was saying for a brief moment. They all yelled, "Who the hell are you?" simultaneously. As he held his ears, Naruto complained, "Do you have to shout that loud? Anyway, I am Naruto Uzumaki, swordsman and ass-kicking mercenary." One of the officers started to say, "Ah, he is the one working under that Eleonora chick, the shinobi or something," but then stopped. As everyone turned to face Naruto, they all went pale. Unheard, Naruto began avoiding spears. "Now, don't freak out here, I am not a shinobi like those SR-ass assholes," he said. Naruto began tearing up armor and weapons around him, yelling, "Why'd I never get a moment of peace? At this rate I'll even have to cancel my planned date with Ellen." The sweat of the enemy knights and soldiers fell. A young boy who was muttering about going on a date with, what do they call her again, was giving them the finger. That girl from Eleonora. Given that he had the chance to touch boobs larger than their own war maidens, many of them were envious of him. The battle eventually came to an end, with the majority of the enemy army having already mounted to confront the Regnitz Leitmerit's force. Naruto was surrounded by a small group of knights and soldiers, the majority of whom needed new gear. Naruto sheathed his sword and remarked, "Well, I think I will end this fight now." The soldiers and knight prepared for an attack. That would never happen the way they had hoped. Naruto made the hand sign, Oryoke no Jutsu, as he spoke. The sight of a fully nude Naruto with tiny puffs of smoke covering her nethers and nipples sent all the enemy soldiers reeling back with nosebleeds. Shortly after, Naruto cancelled the jutsu and began to move in the direction of the Leitmerit's camp. By the time he reached the halfway point, he realized that the battle was over and that both sides' men and women were heading back to their camps. Ellen soon joined him, riding up to him and walking alongside him. He extended his arm to grasp her hand. "Do you have any suggestions for where to take her on the first date, Mom and Dad?" Naruto inquired with his parents. "The beach?" Kushina proposed. "A stroll through the forest," Minato continued. "Make her dinner," Kushina said. "Observe the stars from the rooftop," Minato said. Kushina said, "Picnic in the fields." "The theater," Minato said. "A dining establishment," Kushina, and a number of others. After some modifications, Naruto would ultimately choose the second suggestion. Late in the morning the following day, the soldiers' reactions to Naruto and Ellen's return from their date were a mixture of shock, jealousy, and laughter. They had been gone for about 2 hours after leaving early in the morning to take a stroll through the forest. However, that is not the cause of the different looks. Ellen, who was limping a little, was being supported by Naruto at the moment. A female shouted, "They went and did it," after noticing the limp. They let out loud cheers, groans, and growls, along with blood from bleeding noses that came from many people's twisted imaginations. Before the woman's words took hold and caused both Naruto and Ellen to flush, they gazed at the smiling army of soldiers in bewilderment. Ellen said, "And no, we, first." Another woman said, "So tell me, is he the gentle type or the rough type?" A man yelled, "Naruto, was she as active then as she is in battle?" Someone yelled, "Who made the first move?" Another person questioned, "Is it the reason why you guys took so long?" And countless other questions of the same kind came in quick succession, leaving the pair unable to respond. And their blushes increased with every query. In the meantime, with the SMA plus additional assistance. Around a table, Tigra, Lim, Olga, Mila, and Roland were debating how to handle the second wave of invaders. Barbaros, a master tactician who has allegedly never been defeated before, is leading this second wave, Mila explained. However, she reminded them that her specialty is defensive warfare. As a result, they decided to set up shop on 2 hills that the road passed. At the rate at which the enemy is advancing, it will take 3 to 4 days for them to reach the hills, said Roland. "Do you think that Ellen and Naruto will arrive in time?" replied Tigra. "Meh, we don't need her to win this battle," Mila replied. "I understand not needing the blonde bastard, but why don't we need Breezy Oni-sama?" asked Olga. Olga was regarded by the others as if she had a second head. "What?" inquired the youthful Venati's. Lim proposed, "Let's get back to the subject at hand, shall we?" Olga was the only one who disagreed. However, the latter still desired a response to her query. Following the meeting, Mila, Tigra, and Lim remained in the command tent. "To be honest, though I said that we don't need Ellen, I lied. As it is, we will be hard-pressed to even stall Barbarossa's advance," let alone come out victorious. Mila admitted the truth. We need all the help we can get, even if it comes from her. Mila let out a sigh. And if she is still in Regnitz or even Lightmerits when my messenger arrives, we won't be able to count on her arriving before the battle begins. She continued. Lim remarked, so basically we are on our own. Tigra muttered, still 40,000 enemy soldiers compared to our 7,000. And roughly a third of our forces are tired from constantly fighting, Lim stated. And we also have to take care of the refugees, said Mila. They all three let out a sigh. Tigra questioned, this is going to be a hard battle, isn't it? Lim responded, without a doubt. A few hours ago, back with Ellen and Naruto. A messenger from Mila arrived before Ellen and Naruto could calm the soldiers down enough to explain what had happened after they had thrown a huge tantrum. Eleonora, I can only turn to you for assistance now that I have exhausted all other options. That bastard you're crushing on has asked Olga and I to send some of our forces to help Tigra. Mujinellan has dispatched a huge invasion force under the command of Barbarossa. I am unable to provide an exact number of enemy soldiers, but we are unquestionably vastly outnumbered. I hope you receive this message shortly, Laudamila Lowry. The soldiers hurriedly loaded their equipment onto carts, jumped on themselves, and held on as a long-ass caravan of men and equipment headed south at a comparatively high speed, bringing the entire Lightmerits camp to a halt. A Venati's, a full company of knights, and a blonde, ex-shinobi swordsman running alongside the Venati's were in the lead. For the time being, the soldiers' thoughts about what might have occurred in the forest were pushed to the back of their minds. 3 days later, Ellen and Naruto were near the two hills. Ellen and Naruto were meeting with some of the officers to discuss their options for the impending battle. One of the scouts reported, it looks like the SMA has established a strongly fortified position on the southern hill. Ellen questioned, what about the other one? Well, it is completely covered in snow and there is no indication of activity there, the scout responded. One of the officers questioned, what about the Mujinellan army? They are camped about a league south of our current position. From what I was able to see, they have sentries every 3 dozen alsens in groups of 2 or 3. Ellen remarked, so a surprise attack won't work. She told Naruto, who pouted, and no, Naruto, you may not go and cause havoc in there. True, you may be good at infiltration, but even you won't be able to get past the sentries. And what about inside the camp? What do you do if you are caught? Do you even know their language? Naruto pleaded, then at least let me place some traps in their path. He hadn't been able to play a practical joke since he used his first original just you in the previous battle, but that was more to cut the fight short than to actually play a practical joke on them. And destroy an important trading route in the process, are you nuts? Ellen responded. Naruto sagged in surrender. Even though they had only been a couple for a short time, he was already missing his previous level of independence. He wondered inwardly if Tigra was doing any better with Lim. Up on the hill when Tigra sneezed, Lim jumped and reached for her sword, even though they were already resting in each other's arms. He muttered, someone must be talking crap about me. With a sigh, Lim went back to their quiet sleep. Naruto is back. If the officers hadn't been in a serious mood right now, they would have laughed. Ellen stated, so, my plan is this, before going into great detail about it. Meanwhile, Naruto, at least the real Naruto, had already fallen asleep. In the tent he shared with Ellen, he was already asleep, dreaming of the many tricks he would play on her for not allowing him to get into trouble. In the meantime, within the SMA camp Olga was still a lively ball of energy and was acting like a normal adolescent despite the late hour. She was talking to Roland at the time. They had become friends, and Roland was starting to act more like a father figure to her than a friend. So, when you fought that blonde bastard, you managed to hurt him during the first fight, then got your ass handed to you during the second? Asked Olga. Roland responded, indeed I did. And am I correct in guessing that when you fought Naruto-san, he wiped the floor with you? Olga puffed her cheeks and pouted, saying, he did so many mean things to me during that fight, and I couldn't even land a single hit on him. Roland thought the sight was adorable. With that face, she could easily convince Ganelin that she was cute. Roland told her, you know, you shouldn't let your pride cloud your judgment. Most people who meet Naruto away from the battlefield think of him as a clueless idiot with close to no common sense. But as you get to know him more, you realize just how wrong you were about him. Olga inquired, what about the others? Others? Roland inquired, perplexed. Olga explained, what about those that meet him on the battlefield? Ah, they meet a completely different person than the one we know, said Roland. Olga cocked her head sideways. When I first met him on the battlefield, Naruto gave of an aura of a seasoned veteran who has seen much hardship in his life. At least that is the feeling I got during our first fight. Curious, Olga asked, and your second? Roland trembled a little. It was the closest thing I could imagine to facing a very powerful monster. A monster? Inquired Olga. His ki was wrapping itself around him like a strong suit of armor and his eyes were completely devoid of light. Had he not shown mercy at the last moment, I would bet my life that he would have killed me, said Roland. Olga questioned, so what, he is a monster and a bastard. Roland laughed and said, if by bastard you mean a human, then yes. There was silence between them for a while. Olga started, nay, old man Roland, what is a real war like? Roland remarked, hard to explain to someone who has never experienced it. He then started to collect his thoughts. The closest thing I know that could compare to it would be hell. Hell? Said Olga. In war, there is no such thing as compassion, kindness and peace. There is no fairness. There is only death and destruction. Roland spoke with a grave tone. Do you think the bastard knows what a war is like? Asked Olga. Roland replied, most likely. Roland turned to Olga and said, one does not become as powerful as he is simply by training. I wouldn't be surprised if all he knew in his life was hardship. Sounds like I need to apologize to him about calling him a bastard. Olga replied. Roland grinned at that, but he burst out laughing at Olga's subsequent remark. He is more of an idiot than anything else, alongside Naruto. Naruto thought he might have hay fever after waking up sneezing. Early the following morning, with divisions 1 through 4 getting ready to attack the fortifications, the Muzinellan army divided into 7 groups. Meanwhile, the column of refugees that was seen fleeing behind the hill would be pursued by divisions 5 to 7. Soon, as slingers and archers opened fire on the front lines of the Muzinellan divisions, the cries of the wounded could be heard throughout the hill. The 3 divisions pursuing the refugees, meanwhile, were gradually but surely reducing the gap between the 2 groups. The 5th division saw the cause after hearing the thundering sound of charging horses. Flashback. The day before, standing around a table with a map laid out on it were Mila, Roland, Olga, Tigra, and Lim. As it stands, there are 3 ways that Barbarossa will respond to our defenses. Mila replied. She raised a finger, and the others gazed at her. The first is that he will assault our defenses with his army. That is a common tactic everywhere and not one that Barbarossa uses very often. She raised her hand. The second is one that he will most likely use tomorrow. He will divide his force and have one group assault our position whilst the other will probably try to flank us. Mila extended a third finger. Mila lowered her hand and said, the last one will be problematic to us if he uses it. If he decides to send his army around the second hill and then block of the road, we will be trapped here under siege. The others watched that. How can you be sure that he will use the second option? Replied Lim. Because he doesn't know the lay of the land as we do, and he never doesn't do all or nothing battles. Mila replied. At least that is what my spy in Muzinellan told me. Tigra whispered, we might be able to persuade him to choose a 4th option. Lim said, what was that? Oh, right. I was just thinking that we could ambush him. No, that won't work, said Tigra. Roland instructed him to finish the sentence. Tigra dono. I was thinking to send the refugees north and use them as bait for an ambush, said Tigra. And just how are we supposed to ambush them, Pinky? Replied Olga. Mila assumed a contemplative stance and remarked, the idea isn't that bad to be honest. Just it needs some changes. Such as? Inquired Lim. Well, for one, the ambush is going to be. The end of the flashback. The cry, incoming cavalry, spread like wildfire throughout the ranks of the Muzinellan. Mila and Tigra were at the forefront of the charging cavalry. Tigra was using his deadly accuracy to identify the officers, while Mila used her ice powers to freeze and break any incoming arrows from the Muzinellan archers. A slight elevation in the ground allowed the SMA cavalry to literally leap over the spears, and when the second rank of horses collided with the confused spearmen, mayhem ensued. Mila soon lost her temper. One of the adversaries questioned, who is that short girl? Another person remarked, she is short and pretty small. Even so, this little thing is making us feel like mincemeat. In addition to other things, it appears that Mila has been referred to as small and short by her adversaries far too frequently. Tigra kept sniping the enemy officers and a few unlucky soldiers who were standing close to them, despite being inside the enemy lines. Gerard would throw him another quiver full of arrows whenever he ran out of arrows. Are you not scared? Mila once inquired. If that is what you think, then you should protect me, Tigra replied. Mila sighed in agreement, although she was momentarily taken aback by this. When Barbarossa learned of the surprise attack, he recognized Mila's defensive warfare skills and, primarily due to rumors of Tigra's skill with an arrow, ordered the 6th Division to encircle Mila and Tigra while he and the 7th Division retreated a short distance. Additionally, he had discovered that the fleeing refugees were actually ZHCTED and Brunnish soldiers masquerading as peasants, and that these so-called peasants were now eager to join the conflict. In the meantime, east of the battlefield a sizable army, led by a stunning woman with white hair and a blonde man running joyfully beside her, was making its way to the battlefield. How much farther? The man inquired. He was already running ahead of them at breakneck speed, so she didn't finish. About 2 miles. The woman said. You can go ahead and see if you can, she concluded, make things problematic for the enemy. She yelled, Hey Naruto. You are going the wrong way. Returning to the battlefield, Mila and Tigra were fighting back to back after being split off from the others. To make matters worse, Tigra's supply of bow arrows was almost depleted. A loud war cry reverberated from the north across the valley just as he was ready to fire his final arrow. As they charged in, 3 Brunnish armies yelled things like, Aid our fellow countrymen and those that fight with them. Drive off that pack of Mujinellan wolves. Death to the Slavers. Alongside Barbarossa, according to a Mujinellan scout, a large band of knights has arrived from the north and have engaged our forces. Barbarossa asked, A band of knights from the north? I thought they didn't have any more troops in ambush? The scout explained, they seem to be enemy reinforcements. Inquiring, Barbarossa asked, Reinforcements? Alongside Tigra. The 3 commanders of the reinforcements greeted Tigra. Emil, the head of the Order of Perch, informed him that he and 1,500 knights had come to help Masha's Rodant repel the invasion at his request. For the same reasons as Emil, Shay, the head of the Order of Ludis, also brought 1,500 knights. Both asked to participate in the battle under Tigra's leadership. Tigra gladly took both of their assistants. The 3rd commander's presence, however, was the biggest surprise of the day for Tigra. I am Auguste, leader of the Order of Calvados. A big man with a beard, mustache, and short, spiky black hair said. He was heavily armored, and so was his horse. I and my 2,000 knights are here to assist you, Sir Tigravormund. Auguste, Tigra acknowledged. Well then, we had better go and join in on the hunt, Emil replied. Before they rode off to join the battle, Shay said, Happy hunting. Tigra faced Auguste once more. The big man said, Do you remember me, Lord Tigra? Tigra replied, There is no way that I could forget you, is there? I, Auguste, having once served the house of Vorn, was chagrined that I could not help, given my position as a knight. Began Auguste. But then Sir Roland and Sir Olivier of the Order of Navarre sent me a letter telling me of you. Roland? Inquired Tigra. Before his unfortunate demise at the hands of Ganelon, he sent out letters to those he respects. He wrote that if you fight for Brune and its people, he wished for me to hasten to join you. Said Auguste. And when I heard the tale of what was happening now from Lord Masha's, I knew that I had to come and join you. The same goes for the orders of Perch and Ludis as well. Tigra said, Thank you, Auguste. Auguste informed him, Lord Tigra, you have developed into a fine man, just like Lord Ors. He urged his horse into a gallop so he could catch up to his fellow commanders. Well then, Haya, he exclaimed. Following her successful rescue of Tigra from an attacker, Mila remarked, You probably should have told him that Roland was still alive, you know. Tigra told her, I was too busy remembering old times to do that. At that moment, Gerard summoned him and tossed him a complete quiver. The 5,000 knights and the SMA gradually started to drive the Muochinellan forces back, until a flanking maneuver caught them in the flank. The Brune advance came to a grinding halt as a result. Alongside Barbarossa, another scout said, reporting, 3,000 enemy reinforcements approaching from the northwest. What, again? Cried Barbarossa, alongside Tigra. As Masha's and Augur Hughes approached with a sizable army of knights, Tigra and those around him felt their spirits rising. Masha's yelled, Defend our people and our lands from the invaders, towards them. Augur called out, Follow after Tigravormund Vorn. Alongside Barbarossa, send the 7th Division and the flying column of the 4th to back up the 6th Division, ordered Barbarossa. The scout replied, As you command, returning to the fight. The battle reached a standstill when the Mujinellan reinforcements arrived, with neither side making any progress. Dead and dying people soon littered the ground. When Barbarossa gave the order for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Divisions flying columns to flank the SMA main force, The impasse was broken. The flank of the SMA started to break apart. When Mila saw an enemy swordsman thrash Tigra with his shield and knock him to the ground, she yelled, "Tigra!" However, before she could get to his aid, she was stopped by a number of enemy soldiers who blocked her path. Tigra looked defiantly at the enemy soldier who had beaten him, but he was startled when he saw a strangely familiar-looking knife in the man's throat. "This is," Tigra uttered, successfully positioning the knife's design. Abruptly, he heard the sound of another battle opening and another war cry. "Come on! Get up!" exclaimed Mila, who had finally managed to get to his side. Enemies attacked them from all sides as she assisted him in standing up, but more knives plunged into them, killing them all. Abruptly, a strong gust of wind blew the enemy away from them. They heard a woman say, "Sorry that we are late." "Ellen," exclaimed Tigra. Instead, Mila chose to simply exhale in relief. "You really are late, you know." Ellen took a nearby Naruto by the ear and held him close, saying, "Well, sorry for that, but this guy forgot in which direction he was going due to his excitement." Naruto complained, "I already said that I was sorry. It took me 20 minutes to catch up to you, and that was only because you realized that you were going the wrong way," she reproved him. Mila was utterly delighted to see the formidable shinobi being treated like a child. After learning of the additional 4,000 reinforcements, Barbarossa decided it might be wiser to declare a retreat. He kept asking himself, where in the hell are all those reinforcements coming from? Barbarossa thus acknowledged his defeat at the end of the battle. Additionally, he dispatched a courier to Tigra, who delivered a speech that genuinely put Tigra to sleep. Finally, it all came down to Barbarossa's desire to give Tigra the title of Silverash. Tigra and Mila were the only people left in the tent after the boring speech. After completing his delivery, the courier went back to the Mujinellan camp. Lim and Rurik were called in to deal with the prisoners. Ellen and Naruto went to the Lightmerits camp, which would meet the SMA camp the following day. The nightly order commanders went to settle their men in and make sure Roland was still alive, which Moshes and Augur Hughes accompanied them with. As a result of Olga, they were given a number of nicknames. To everyone's amusement, Hughes and Augur changed their names to White Old Man and Gray Old Man, respectively. Emile became Mr. Mustache, Shay became Mr. Angry Face, because she believed his slanted eyebrows gave the impression that he was angry, and Auguste became Massy Brown Bush. 1. Olga pouted whenever any of them attempted to object, and the men were unable to stop her after that. After a while, after checking on the prisoners, Ellen went back to the command tent to discover that Tigra was not there. When she returned, she discovered that he was sleeping on Mila, who turned to face Lim as she walked in. She started to say, "Please, this is not what you think it is," but Lim had already started to grab her sword. As she slowly pulled out her sword, Lim said, "You have 5 seconds to explain yourself." Mila quickly informed her, "He fell asleep and I tried to catch him. Well, he fell on top of me. And do you mind giving me a hand here? He is heavier than he looks." Tigra muttered something about the pillows needing to be larger all of a sudden. Everyone, let's say, was relieved that Mila had left Lavia's in her own tent. 1. Simply consider the characters as a young child would. Chapter 17. Royalty and additional issues pertaining to women. A few days following the conflict at the moment, Tigra, Lim, Naruto, Ellen, and Mila were all catching up on their respective lives. Mila interrupted Naruto and Ellen, well, mostly Ellen, as they were discussing the events following their battle. Even Naruto shuddered when she said, "Oh, now that you mention that bit, is it true that you and Naruto went at it in a forest for 2 hours?" With a red face, Ellen stammered, "WWH, what are you talking about?" Nearly simultaneously, Naruto said, "I just took her on a date." Mila had somehow figured out what a date was, while Tigra and Lim were unsure. "But it is said that you came out of the forest with a limp, Ellen," Mila went on. Lim and Tigra were both beginning to flush. Tigra's hair matched Ellen's face. Naruto said, "Let's be clear here. During the walk, Ellen was bitten on the leg by a snake." Ellen's face gradually returned to its natural color as she added, "And fortunately the snake was the type that only paralyzed the victim. I managed to suck out most of the poison, though a small amount remained in her leg, leading to her walking with a limp for the rest of the day," Naruto said. In an attempt to unnerve Naruto, Mila questioned, "Oh? Was that as far as you dared to go?" Ellen blushed and remarked, "I would probably not have been able to walk afterward if we had done it then and there." Lim and Tigra were making a concerted effort to avoid considering what might have occurred if he had gone farther. Anyway, Lim said, attempting to shift the conversation. Eleonora-sama still is one up on you, Ludmila-sama. The little brunette said, huh? What do you mean? In this tent, you are the only one who isn't in a relationship with anyone, Lim stated bluntly. The blue of Mila's hair stood out sharply against the red of her face. Tigra questioned, why did you have to go and say that? I am sure that there is someone out there who is perfect for her. Lim's expression was deadpan as she looked at him. Spoilsport, she pondered. A few days later, the SMA has spent the past few days returning to its headquarters in the territoire from the southern borders. Tida kept herself occupied while Tigra was occupied with meetings and other activities by assisting in the distribution of supplies to the refugees who accompanied the army. She did this primarily out of a desire to aid them, but she also harbored a small amount of sympathy for them because Naruto had sent them in the orderly nights through what he refers to as initiation, as soon as they left the battlefield. In essence, Naruto applied itching powder to everyone's clothing, but what made matters worse was that it didn't wash off with water, which resulted in some strange side effects. Tida endured a terrible experience because she had an itch that she couldn't reach, and it wasn't on her skin or back, for that matter. Naruto's even worse prank on Ellen, dyeing her hair from pure white to alternating lines of red, blue, and green, was the only reason he wasn't found and beaten up. Furthermore, they couldn't have apprehended him even if they had. In any case, Ellen has not spoken to him since. Although Naruto was now occupied with assisting the blacksmiths at the camp's forge, a wager was being held in the back of his mind. The mindscape of Naruto, Kushina and Minato were wagering on Ellen or Naruto to crack first, with Kushina placing her bet on Ellen and Minato placing her bet on Naruto. The stakes were high. For a week, the Loost had to clean the kitchen in the mindscape they had created together. Returning to reality, Ellen was circling her tent. She went to get a tent for herself after Naruto played a practical joke on her for not letting him cause mischief among the Mujinellen camp. She found herself debating whether or not to simply forgive Naruto for his actions once more. The memory of waking up with the multicolored hair still blazed brightly in her mind, even though she had somehow managed to wash the paint out of it. The part of her that wanted to forgive him was at odds with the part of her that didn't want to see him anymore, and both of those parts were at odds with the part of her that wanted to beat the living daylights out of Naruto before she could forgive him. Every component had drawbacks that offset the advantages of the others, and vice versa. Unfortunately, Ellen's heart was slowly being torn apart by this three-way standoff, and it was starting to show on her face in the form of dark rings around her eyes from lack of sleep, slouching limbs, and a sharply short fuse. Meanwhile, Lim was talking to Moshes and Augur in one of the officers' tents. Lim said to Moshes, I apologize for not being present during the main battle. Not at all. You were stationed at the barricades, so there wasn't much you could have done in any case, the elderly gentleman replied. At any rate, the fact that others are recognizing that Tigra's undertaking is in the right is a great victory, Augur concluded. Moshes and Lim said, I agree. Tigra and Roland, the resolve of the living and the word of the formerly dead are what motivated them to gather here. Augur continued. I did nothing more than help facilitate it. At first I thought he was just a vulnerable, happy-go-lucky and lazy boy at first, but now, said Lim. Right now, he is a third power within Brune, Augur replied. Moshes concluded, as well as your lover, right? The words made Lim smile a little. Moshes said, well, now, how do you think Tigra will act next? Lim grinned. Right then, with Tigra as he and Tigra stood up and shook hands, a knight said, well then, if you will excuse me. Tigra said, thank you very much. Tigra sat back down, and Mila said, Tigra, you should come over to my camp. I'll make some delicious tea to help relieve your stress and fatigue. Ho? When did you go from calling him Tigravormud to just Tigra? Ellen responded. Naruto entered before Ellen could respond, nodding to her formally and briefly before introducing himself and the other two informally. Yo, Tigra, potato. Mila yelled at him, WHO, are you calling a potato? Tigra said, hello, Naruto. What can we do for you? Before him, Naruto set a scroll on the desk and unfolded it. This is a list of items that the blacksmiths are short on currently, said Naruto. Tigra's eyebrows twitched as he glanced at the list. He said, they need a new anvil. Naruto scratched the back of his head and said, yup. Tigra sighed and contemplated accepting Mila's tea invitation. All right, but just try not to break any more anvils and hafts, Tigra murmured. Before heading out, Naruto said, I'll try. Ellen's legs wouldn't move, but she wanted to follow him. Lim came into the tent just as Mila was about to speak again. Ellen's paralysis was broken by the sight of her friend. She said, "I'll leave things here to you, Lim." In response, the blonde said, "Roger that." Ellen was only able to take 10 steps before the sounds of a verbal altercation broke out from the tent she had just left, and she could see the two females using Tigra as a tug-of-war rope through the open flaps. After finally deciding to go look for Naruto, she shook her head and resumed walking. She needed a change of clothes first, though, not long after. By the time she found him, the sun had already set, and he was sitting on a hilltop overlooking the camp, holding a strop in one hand and one of his short swords in his lap, while the other was on the ground beside him. "Naruto," she started. He glanced up at her and ceased sharpening the edge of his blade. "Yes?" he asked. I apologize," Ellen said. Naruto returned to honing the edge and asked, "For what?" The more she talked, the more naturally she was able to say, "For ignoring you, these past few days." Naruto said, "Think nothing of it." Ellen questioned, "How can I think nothing of it? I have been trying to hurt you emotionally." Naruto questioned, "And I could care about that, why?" Although Ellen was surprised by the question, she misinterpreted its purpose entirely. She started to walk away, but she stopped when she felt a hand grab her wrist. I am sorry." He looked up at Ellen and said, "I am not angry at you, Ellen. It is just that unlike me, you are not used to this type of emotional pain." Ellen took some time to comprehend what he was saying. Two entities cleared their ears to listen in on the conversation inside Naruto's head. Ellen said, "What do you mean?" "What I mean is I have learned to forgive people rather than hold a grudge," Naruto replied. She questioned, "You mean you never held it against me?" Naruto grinned as usual and said, "Nope." There was a groaning sound inside his head. He heard his mother groan. "Naruto, why did you have to forgive her at the start?" His father said to his mother, "I can't believe I was able to outstrip you for once." Naruto and Ellen were silent for a while. When Naruto noticed her seated beside him, he sheathed his short sword. She leaned over and put her head on his shoulder after they had been silent for a while. After a few seconds, she sensed his arm encircling her shoulder and drawing her in close to allow him to lay his head on hers. Naruto jerked to his feet and sniffed the air. According to Ellen, she only witnessed Naruto fleeing quickly while sporting a huge smile. Ellen immediately ran after him, but to give herself an extra boost, Arifar quickly created a sphere of air behind her. What on earth, she pondered, just now with Tigra and company. Lim, Mila, and Tita were present at Tigra's dinner. Rurik had challenged Gerard to a drinking competition, and Ellen and Naruto were nowhere to be found. "I am surprised that Naruto isn't here," said Lim. "I agree with you there, but at least we can take our time eating," said Tita. "Well, with how tasty this ramen is, I can't really blame him for leaving only the empty pot behind," said Tigra. On that point, none of the women could argue with him. "What do you mean he leaves only the pot behind?" replied Mila. "That," Tigra started, but they were all distracted by a sudden movement. The pot had vanished and then resurfaced on the ramen Shinigami's lap in the blink of an eye, and its contents were rapidly vanishing. Tigra said, "That is what I mean." Unable to fully comprehend what was happening, Mila could only nod. Ellen showed up at the tent entrance and said, "Naruto, where are why?" Her stomach rumbled when she saw Naruto holding the ramen pot in his lap. She called out, "Hey, leave some for me." However, Naruto had already consumed all of the ramen by that point. "Ah, a snack of ramen now and then really works wonders," said Naruto. Tigra, Lim, Ellen, and Tita all sighed. "Speak of the devil and he shall come," was what they were all thinking. In contrast, Mila, she bellowed, "You call that a snack?" As cheerful as ever, Naruto replied, "Yep." He was so ecstatic that he failed to notice how much ki the short Venades was throwing at him. Only when he heard her say, "You call enough ramen to feed 10 people, a fucking snack," did he realize the danger. To his surprise, Naruto felt the force of the shout push his hair back a little. When Sakura-chan and I yelled at Kakashi-sensei for being late, did he feel this way? "What?" Naruto asked. Ellen muttered, bracing herself for a migraine she knew was imminent. "Give it up, Mila. At times even I cannot understand him." This coming from his ex, Mila started, but she quickly closed her mouth with a loud clack. When Ellen and, somewhat unexpectedly, Naruto poured ki into the tent. The others were also adding in their ki, though it was difficult to spot. Ellen snarled, "That is former ex, you brat. Get the fuck away from there, GTFAFT. is what Mila's instincts and even Lavia's were telling her to do. There is also GTHAF, or get the hell away from there. Unfortunately, the amount of ki paralyzed her muscles. Mila would never comprehend how Naruto could create duplicates of himself, change them into two muscular men in green spandex suits, and then have them embrace while sobbing waterfalls. 1. To top it all off, Naruto made her watch it repeatedly. What followed could only be described as the worst night Mila had ever had. Later on, Mila would swear that she could feel her dragon gear trembling with fear, too. Mila's stomach gave up trying to keep the food in on the fourth repeat, which was the only consolidation she had. Ellen and the others left on the third repeat, barely able to hold in their stomach contents. Some distance away in another tent, a young woman with light blue eyes and blonde hair opened her eyes with a determined expression. She would soon go up to him and make her request. Time skip. Morning. Approximately a week later, Tigra made the decision to relocate the SMA headquarters because they were afraid that their presence would lead to an attack on territoire by either Ganelin or Thenardier. They were offered a hiding place in Fort Perch, their own headquarters, by Emile, the leader of the Knightly Order of Perch. A young woman with blonde hair approached Bertrand, who was occupied with cleaning some of the equipment that was being stored, etc. In the meantime, in a chamber of the neighboring castle, near the queen-sized bed in the middle of the room, a purple portal materialized out of thin air. A well-built, purple-clad woman with a scythe emerged from the portal. The sleeping person turned around and grabbed something, which just so happened to be her left breast, and gave her a few experimental squeezes when she smiled and reached out to brush some of his hair away from his face. Valentina, the woman, was unable to take his hand away if she woke him up, so she covered her mouth to keep any uncontrollable groans from escaping. She silently sighed in relief that his hand didn't remain there for very long. However, before she could speak, in his sleep, the man muttered, "Limbs are much bigger and better." Since she had secretly enjoyed the man's caressing of her breast and he had stated that he preferred someone else's breast over hers, Valentina felt a tick mark appear on her temple and had to fight the urge to kill him for his remark. "If you had been awake, you'd be executed for lèse-majesté, Tigrvormudvorn-san." Valentina responded. She opened another portal and leapt through, saying, "Well then, I will see you again sometime, hero." Tita called for Tigra to wake up after hearing a knock on the door a short while later. "After a while, too, Prince Regnas?" inquired Mila. "But didn't you slay him at Dinant?" "I don't know. It isn't as though anyone took his head, after all," Ellen responded. Regin sensed that people were watching her. "It is okay. If you trust me, you can trust them as well, despite your apparent history," said Tigra. Mila just looked deadpan, while Ellen puffed out her chest with joy. Lim's expression was, "Not this Agan." Naruto wasn't actually listening. Before long, everyone was seated at the table, anticipating Regin's explanation. "In the confusion of the night raid, I was attacked by an assassin," Regin said. "On the battlefield, anything can get you passed off as falling in battle." "Why were you posing as a boy in the first place, anyway?" Ellen inquired. Regin's face darkened as he said, "For me and my mother's sake. In Brune, a queen who bears only daughters is scorned. What's more, the odds of a queen succeeding the throne are extremely low at best." Mila inquired, "So you represented yourself as a prince? That's quite a brash move to make." For an entirely different reason, Ellen concurred, saying, "That is for sure. That might have been fine at the time, but what would you have done if you'd developed breasts like Lim?" With the exception of Ellen, everyone sighed after glancing at Lim's breasts. However, Tigra's sigh was more like, "What's wrong with her breasts?" Lim's sigh was more like, "Not this again," and Mila's was more like, "Don't you dare remind me of the size difference." Naruto's sigh was one of pure boredom. "I am more surprised that your disguise worked for so long," Lim replied. Before Regin could respond, Naruto stated, "That is actually the hardest part." Mashas and the others gazed at him. "The best way to fool an enemy is to fool your comrades," started Naruto. "If your comrades underestimate you, the probability that your enemy does so as well is exponentially greater." With a deadpan tone, Ellen questioned, "Another lesson your mentor taught you?" Naruto yawned and said, "And one that I am playing even now. If I may ask, Regin-chan, what was your first impression of me?" Regin said bluntly, "An idiot who carries himself with a powerful aura and whose eyes show a lifetime of hardship." Naruto hung his head in disbelief at being called an idiot once more. In the meantime, the women were laughing at Regin's remarks as well as at his response. Ellen remarked, "Naruto, you are not deceiving her in any manner." "Not you too," Naruto whimpered a little. Ellen moved her chair next to his and rested her head on his shoulder, saying, "But, you are my idiot." Lim stated stoically, "Eleonora-sama, we are still at a formal meeting." "Since when?" inquired Mila. All sense of formality is gone out of the window the moment Naruto walks in through the door. Naruto objected, "Oi," but was totally disregarded. "True that, though Ellen, formal or not, this is still a meeting," Tigra replied. Ellen said, "Back to the subject at hand then," with a tone of disappointment. "What should we do, Tigra?" Tigra glanced at her and said, "Huh?" Mila went on, "To be honest, she was going to hurt us." Tigra glanced between her and Regin, who was wearing a dejected expression. Ellen leaned forward and said, "The prince is alive and is being threatened by Thénardier and Ganelon. That is what we could claim. When the people find out that the prince is a girl, far from having them believe us, it would be like playing straight into Ganelon and Thénardier's hands." Naruto replied, "That does not mean that we don't have to look into her story. And with the state His Majesty is in, I doubt we will have an opportunity to learn anything from that end." Masha's replied. Regin asked her father what was wrong with him, and he told her about his condition. Tigra said, "But, why come to me?" After a brief pause, she stated, "Because you do not have any underlying motives." Even Naruto was listening as she said, "Under the circumstances, when you were even branded a traitor, you had nothing to gain by helping the population in the Southlands. And yet, you desperately fought for them. What's more, when you granted my request, you were kind to me." "What request was this?" Lim inquired, sensing that the response would not be favorable. Regin's face was flushed, which did little to help. "The other day, I asked him to bathe me." Tigra recalled that incident. Naruto addressed Tigra, saying, "You dog." Tigre gave a growl. Lim. At that, Tigra gulped and turned very pale. Unaware of her best friend's behavior, Ellen questioned, "You like playing dangerous games, don't you? If Tigra had taken advantage of you, were you planning to leave without saying a word?" Regin blushed even more and said, "I know it was craven of me, but at that time I couldn't think of anything else to do to test him." "Hey, Dad and Mom, how do you feel about this?" Naruto asked in his mind. "She is attracted to that Tigra, pink-haired guy." The simultaneous response was given. "Ellen," murmured Naruto, "I think Lim has competition." She returned the whisper. "You think so?" Naruto questioned. "Why else would she ask him to help her bathe? I didn't know that Tigra was such a dog." That made Ellen stifle a laugh. Lim is not going to like this. In the meantime, Tigra had calmed down. "Regin, that is there any way you can prove that you are His Majesty's child?" he inquired. Regin uttered a single word after a pause, "Lutetia." Except for Naruto, everyone was taken aback. Masha's inquired, "Duke Ganelon's territory?" "Artesium, the capital of Ludia," Regin started. "Under it, there is a door that can be opened in a way that is only taught to the royal family. This is something that the Prime Minister, Badwin, also knows." Tigra paused, then got to his feet. They all stared at him, anticipating his response. He said, "Let's go to Artesium," and the doors were flung open before anyone could express agreement or disagreement. "Breezy Oni-chan. Booby Ne-chan," a little girl in pink exclaimed as she entered, followed by a giant in black armor who was much bigger than her. Ellen said, "Olga." The moniker Olga had given her years ago was making Lim flush. When Olga saw Naruto, she screamed, "I have been for you ah. What is the blonde idiot doing here?" Tick marks appeared on Naruto's head as he twitched at her name for him. But Olga forgot about him right away. "I am returning to ZHCTED. It is almost time for the nomads to come and trade with us," said Olga. "I'm leaving big man Roland in your care as a result. Please take care of him." Her treatment of Roland as her subordinate caused everyone to perspire. Naruto turned to face him after she had gone and the doors had shut. "I feel sorry for you, man." Roland could only nod in agreement as he said, "I should have warned you that women are scary." 1. In essence, Lee and Guy sharing a hug as children. 2. The encounter between Masha's, Lim, and Tigra, as well as Princess Regin's revelation, are depicted in the anime. If you're unaware of how that transpired, watch the show. The encounter occurs in episode 11. Chapter 19. Datebao, I'm back, at a different place. Hundreds of Alsons could hear the clacking of chains and the trembling of the ground in every direction. An elderly man wearing a white cloak and cape said, "Thank you for waiting for so long, Your Highness." Walking over to him, Thénardier remarked, "It looks like you've brought me more than I was expecting." 5 enormous dragons, 3 bronze earth dragons, 1 fire dragon, and 1 dual-headed dragon that loomed over the others were in front of them. Thick chains were fastened to the bodies of the 2 larger dragons. "What are these chains?" Thenardier inquired. "They were specially made for me," the old man remarked. "These dragons ought to have no trouble consuming and expelling a war maiden now." With a face that could only be described as simultaneously frightening, joyful, and pleased, Thenardier said, "Well done." In Artesium at that time, as he considered his next course of action, Ganelon was aware of the dragons and the Tigra's association with Regin, Ellen, and Mila, as well as the unexpected survival of Tigra and Roland, thanks to his mastery of the dark arts. Placing chess figures on a map in front of him, he pointed out the various factions, placing a white knight and white queen near Fort Perch and a toppled black pawn piece near the capital with an upright red rook directly on the city. He looked into his seeing orb once more and pondered. He added a number of other figures to the map, with the blue ones signifying knightly orders and nobles who remain neutral, the red ones signifying those who support Thenardier, the black ones representing his supporters, and the white ones representing those who support Tigra. Ganelon, who had only recently started to pay attention to Naruto and was unaware of much of his fighting skills, thought, "Now, the only thing I don't know is what that Naruto guy will do." The first time he had heard of Naruto was when a report of the Battle of the Orange Plains arrived, but by that time, Naruto was out of his scrying range. "Well, whatever. There is nothing he can do now, even if he makes an unexpected move," Ganelon said, adding that Vorn would perish with his war maiden allies. Time-lapse Thenardier forces literally destroyed Ganelon's army, as he had foreseen, and a few days later, in an attempt to conceal his own escape, Ganelon set Artesium on fire. Before the SMA could reach the royal grotto beneath Artesium, Thenardier gathered his forces and set out to cut them off. In the meantime, the ZHCTED king was giving Safi a royal order to bring Ellen and Mila back to ZHCTED. On the Vilcresnes plains close to Artesium, the forces of the SMA and the Thenardiers engaged in combat back in Brune. Time-lapse concludes, with an estimated 25,000 soldiers, the SMA, 1, engaged the 30,000-strong army of the Thenardiers. Most commanders would claim that Thenardier had the decisive edge, but in practice, both sides were roughly equal, at least, that's what Thenardier and the SMA commanders thought. The SMA had 2 war maidens and some of the best-trained soldiers in Brune and ZHCTED on their side, while Thenardier's army had 5 dragons in numbers. 3 separate engagements took place on the battlefield, with the central engagement being by far the largest and the flanking engagements being smaller but no less intense. Rurik had the right flank, Ellen and Mila had the left, but they broke through their lines to confront the dragons, who posed the greatest threat to the SMA. Tigra led the central division. Lim was left in charge of the left flank as a result, but it didn't really matter in the current scenario. The command was simply passed from one combat-experienced woman to another. Then there is Naruto, who used his 2 short swords to battle his way deep into the enemy lines because of the cramped area. In other words, he was doing what he does best, which is getting into trouble, usually making things worse, and then somehow managing to get his ass out of the mess. In the meantime, Tigra was accurately and lethal, living up to the title that Barbarossa had bestowed upon him. Gerard and Rurik were engaged in another contest to see who could defeat the most opponents. Roland, on the other hand, had it easy. His death had been made public, and his presence on the battlefield caused all the superstitious enemy soldiers to flee, thinking they were up against a ghost. He commended those who had managed to overcome their fear of the ghost, specifically, but instead of pride rising, they became more pale. Later, Roland would find a seal on his throat that gave his voice a faint whispering echo. Alongside Naruto, why was Naruto having a bad day? Because his mother was in a rage, and Ellen, despite being in his mindscape, had sensed Kushina's key when they slept that night. He didn't get much sleep because his parents had been fighting in his head about how far Naruto should take his relationship with Ellen, and had been doing so since the day before. Naruto started talking while simultaneously fending off another pair of swords. "Guys, really, it's obvious that none of you can beat me, so why don't you give up? I pledge to ensure that you receive equitable treatment," he said. "Avoid that." He could see that some of the soldiers around him were thinking about accepting his offer, but several of them yelled. A soldier, who appeared to be an officer based on his armor, yelled, "True, you have managed to defeat dozens of us, but we are a fucking lot, and there is only one of you," before being interrupted by a number of poofs. Suddenly, 10 Narutos appeared in front of them, 9 of whom vanished in smoke clouds as the real Naruto closed his eyes, and as soon as he did, he felt something around him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Unaware of the impact his harem jutsu had on the soldiers, he thought, this is, and his astonishment also caused his parents to break off their argument. Naruto, is this feeling what I believe it to be? Minato inquired. Speaking aloud, Naruto stated, yeah, it is, Dadbeo. How long will you stand there chatting to yourself, boss? One of his clones called out to him. He opened his eyes and said, sorry. He saw enemy soldiers' bodies everywhere he looked, most, if not all, of them smiling, reminding him of. Is it just me, or do these guys look like Ero Sennin when he goes to the onsen? Clone number 1 inquired. Clone number 2 remarked, you are right, they do look like him. Naruto remarked, let's just be glad that they are not him then. Why? Clone number 3 inquired. Did we ever use this jutsu to Ero Sennin? Clone number 4 informed them. A recollection of the time they tried that made them all shiver. Flashback. A year prior to going back to Konoha, Jiraiya said to the 14-year-old Naruto, all right, let's see how far you have gotten. Naruto declared, I will defeat you today with pleasure. We will see about that. Jiraiya grinned, after 20 minutes. Jiraiya was surprised by how long Naruto was able to resist him. The elderly man remarked, you sure have grown a lot, Naruto. Naruto told him, creating a large number of shadow clones around Jiraiya, I am still getting started. Henge. They all yelled, and the smoke briefly blinded Jiraiya. He heard a vulpine voice next to him say, Ero Sennin, and then heard many of the same voices swarming toward him. Wow, this is fantastic. Jiraiya yelled as a bunch of nude Narukos emerged from the smoke. While Jiraiya had appeared in front of her and was measuring groping her breasts, she abruptly vanished, and one of the clones, Narukos, cried out. A few moments later, Jiraiya created a couple of clones that began measuring the other Narukos. Naruko's 3 sizes, along with other notes, were being scrawled down in a notebook by another Jiraiya using some strange technique. All of this occurred in 4 seconds, after which the Narukos began to retaliate with extreme female prejudice. The original Jiraiya and the other clones were critically hit in the balls, courtesy of certain kneecaps, and half of the Jiraiya clones were smacked so hard that if they had been X-rayed right away, the doctors would have discovered a hand-shaped fracture on his skull. The end of the flashback. Naruto remarked, I almost did a Hinata just thinking about it. Because he didn't want to go through that again, Naruto refused Jiraiya's demand for a rematch after winning that spar. Naruto's only takeaway from that battle was that he was able to hit Jiraiya with a critical and that the person writing the notes had been a clone, which meant that the notes were not actually returned to the original. Let's just resume our battle, shall we? The other Narutos concurred with clone number 5's statement, and the steamrolling proceeded. After the battle, it was midday. As Tigra, Lim, Naruto, Mashes, Roland, and Regen sat with a bandaged Ellen and Mila, they discussed the events of their battle with the dragons. The dragon's chains, those are probably what cancelled out our dragon arts, Ellen clarified. Cancelled? Lim inquired. Looking at the Black Knight, Ellen remarked, the same was true for your Durandal, Roland. There must be some metal in this world that our dragon arts are ineffective against. In other words, you two are in a bad spot? Naruto said, earning him a glare from Lim, Ellen and Mila. What? Would you mind if I stuck an icicle up your butt? Mila inquired. He's right. Both of you will be unable to battle the dragons in the upcoming battle due to your injuries, Masha stated. It's true. Roland concurred, to be honest, I don't see how the two of you can go up against these 2 dragons again and survive, especially since Ellen took the brunt of that flame attack and Mila was thrown around like a yarn ball. This raises the question of how we should care for them. Using my bow would be one way to solve this, Tigra said, but I have no idea what it will do to me. The dragons can be defeated with conventional weapons, but the loss of life will be, Lim said. The others stared at Naruto in shock as he interrupted, I'll do it. I will take on the dragons. Naruto, don't, Ellen started, but Naruto cut her off. Hey, Ellen. All this time I have been holding back my full strength for the same reason why you don't use your dragon's arts against normal humans, Naruto warned her, adding, I know you want me to stay safe, but I am sure you know all too well by now that I am strong enough to fend for myself. I'm going to get ready for the next battle, he said, turning back to the others. Make sure these 2 miscreants don't do anything foolish, please. That is rich coming from you, Naruto Dono. Masha's laughed. At least they don't go around causing trouble wherever they go. Naruto shot back, Oi. I can't help it if trouble continues to follow me. Regen, holding back a laugh, remarked, I doubt that. I personally have never heard of a person called Trouble. Mila smirked and added, and even if there were, Ellen would make mincemeat out of that person if she were following you. The other remarks made Naruto feel extremely uneasy. At last, he simply bounded away. Mila remarked, ah, revenge is sweet. I didn't want to bring this up in front of him, but he is right, Roland replied. What are you saying? Ellen inquired. He is indeed holding back on his full strength. Roland elaborated. During both of our fights I had the feeling that there was more to him than just the person we all know. Indeed, the only time I have seen him get wounded during a fight was that one time when he fought against Roland, Tigra replied. A hush fell over the group as they considered what had been said. I have a feeling that the number of things we don't know about him will just grow from here on out, Lim stated. Mila informed her that would be an understatement. As they proceeded to discuss strategies for the upcoming conflict, Naruto was once more sitting by himself on a hill, but this time he wasn't sharpening his blades. Prior to doing anything else, he wanted to make sure of something. However, he quickly discovered that he had become rusty in the process of doing so. After some time, Naruto muttered, well, at least I know I can still use it. His father said, and now you can use that jutsu again without repercussions. His mother added, just try not to change the landscape too much. Naruto replied, yeah. Whatever. Naruto said, I think that there is also something that I will need before going to battle. He got to his feet. What? His parents both inquired. All Naruto said was, a cloak. After a while, with the exception of Naruto conducting the bulldozing, right through the middle of the enemy's left flank, instead of Ellen and Mila, the second battle started essentially the same as the first. When the soldier declared that he was going to do that, Naruto actually laughed at the expressions on their faces. He was now standing in front of the two dragons that were still there, examining each one. You know, where I come from, reptiles are often turned into handbags. Naruto was saying loudly. Unfortunately, I don't know anyone who is tall enough to be able to carry a handbag that is made from your hides. The fire dragon opened its mouth and spat fire at Naruto, who had been largely still for some time, as the dragons roared and charged. Alongside Thénardier, upon witnessing the lone figure engulfed in flames, Thénardier remarked, what a fool. Alongside Ellen, Naruto. Fearing for her lover's life, Ellen let out a scream. Everyone in the area, both allies and enemies, turned to stare at her and then at the roaring fire after she yelled. With sincere sympathy in his voice, an enemy soldier said, I know I am not supposed to say this, but I pity that guy, if there is anything left of him. A number of other soldiers concurred. All of the fighting paused for a moment as a sudden surge of power passed over them. Alongside Naruto. Is this it? That Teme Sasuke can make hotter flames than that one, inquired Naruto. The fire was pushed away from its epicenter when a tornado suddenly burst from inside the pillar of flames. Alongside Ellen. What the? Ellen exclaimed, and Mila echoed her reaction. They saw the tornado and could see that, despite its great power, it was comparable to some of Arifar's attacks. When was that guy able to do that? Mila inquired. Naruto is back. Naruto was completely unharmed when the tornado vanished, his red cloak flapping in the remaining wind. He started walking toward the dragons before accelerating to a full sprint, saying, I guess this means it is my turn. He leapt on top of the fire dragon and stabbed it through its thick hide with one of his short swords, but he saw that the wound was not deep enough. The dragon turned and attempted to spit more flames at him in retaliation, but he was easily sidestepped. A crater was left behind when he crashed into the ground after failing to avoid the headbutt of one of the two-headed dragon's heads. As he got to his feet, Naruto said, thanks for that. It relieved a long-standing neck ache. Do you think you could assist me with my knee? Once more, the dragons roared and charged. After sheathing his short swords, Naruto reached up and slowly drew his katana handle before attacking the fire dragon once more. This time, he charged straight through its flames and stabbed it in the chest, causing a massive amount of oil to spill out. The dragon instinctively ignited the remaining oil in its mouth before falling into the oil puddle below after Naruto leapt into the air and stabbed it in the head. Flame-grilled giant lizard, wonder what it tastes like. Naruto pondered. Ah, who cares, nothing tastes worse than Sakura-chan's cooking. A certain pink-haired girl sneezed and then threw a fit in hundreds of Naruto ouse and timelines, frequently causing a building or two to be destroyed. Naruto looked at the last dragon, which roared loudly, and said, now, what to do with you? Ah, I know. Why don't I put on a big show to take you down? You're a big brute. After creating 2 clones, Naruto started creating a Rasengan and then infused it with his wind chakra. Alongside Ellen. What is that? Ellen stammered as she saw a white sphere in Naruto's hand that looked like her lay Atmos but felt much more powerful, with 4 blades spinning at high speeds. Although she was a long way away, she could still hear the techniques screech. What is he doing, Ellen? Mila inquired. I don't know, Ellen replied. I have never seen him do anything like it before. Alongside Thenardier, the old man asked himself, what the, does he also have dragon gear of the wind type? Alongside Naruto heard his father utter the words, I am feeling jealous right now. Why is that? Inquired Naruto. You managed to complete the jutsu that I created, Minato replied. But I agree with its name. Naruto yelled, Futon. Rasen Shuriken, and then hurled the wind and chakra mass at the dragon. Alongside Thenardier, nice try, but dragon arts don't work on, he said, but what came next interrupted him. Alongside Ellen, the fact that Arifar shuddered in Ellen's hand suggested that Naruto's attack was exceedingly risky. It was hard for her to disagree when, seconds later, I can't believe you're kidding me. The ground trembled as a huge explosion engulfed the enormous dragon, and Mila screamed. Alongside Naruto stood where he was and watched the massive dome of Razorwind do its work. He could already see the blood gushing out and the dragon's hard scales being torn away, only to be torn apart by more wind blades. Okay. Maybe I should have held back a bit, Naruto replied. Now I won't be able to make a handbag out of it. Though those are only made out of crocodiles or alligators, said Minato. Naruto informed them, no, some of the more costly ones are made from the skins of snakes and lizards. Kushina remarked, I thought snake skins were used to make purses. Same thing, Naruto pondered. He returned his focus to the dome, which had reached the end of its useful life and was gradually fading away, leaving the dragon's lifeless body suspended over a massive crater before plummeting with a resounding crash. Naruto walked away from the dead dragon and made his way directly to Ellen, saying, well, now that is done, I feel like having some ramen. It goes without saying that the enemy soldiers wisely chose to give him a very wide berth as he approached. Luckily for Naruto, no one had actually seen his facial markings during his recent battle, otherwise, he would have had to explain his sage abilities to Ellen. Somewhere else, as Ganelon observed Naruto through his orb, he thought, most interesting, for him to hold such power, interesting, it seems like the markings on his face indicate that he is using his full power. That night Ellen and Naruto were sitting in a clearing, watching the stars, on another date, in the surrounding woods. Naruto, Ellen whispered, I need you. Naruto stared at her, not quite understanding what she was saying, until his mother's frightening assistance helped him understand. Are you certain you can handle it? He touched her back gently and asked. Ellen shifted to sit on his lap, facing him, and remarked, the wounds don't really hurt that much. Ellen took his hand and put it on her breasts before he could answer. Ellen moaned as Naruto squeezed her, acting more instinctively than anything else, and then he went beyond hands-on clothes. After an hour, the SMA camp, everyone who was still awake was alerted when a group of red-faced sentries marched back into the camp. The news that Naruto and Ellen were fighting like animals in heat eventually roused the entire camp, but initially they were too ashamed to describe what they had witnessed. A lot of people only had 2 things to say, fucking finally. They could finally get revenge on Naruto for all the tricks he keeps pulling on them. In the meantime, in ZHCTED, beside a table with a glass orb on it, a large scythe was leaning against a chair that resembled a throne, and a woman with large breasts was seated on it. Valentina was occupied with scrying, specifically in an attempt to find out more about Naruto. She laughed, a little aroused, oh my, he sure had a lot of meat there. I wonder if I can convince Ellen to let me borrow him for a night, she said. Near the SMA camp the following day at the moment, Ellen, Lim, Regin, Tita, and Mila were taking a bath in one of the nearby natural springs. Lim inquired, Lady Eleonora, are you all right? From the rumors you and Naruto were pretty wild at it last night in the woods. Yeah. Thanks to the medics my back is mostly healed. Ellen replied. Ellen turned to her friend and said, I can take it easy for a while and recuperate fully now that Thenardier's army is retreating. Retaliation for being reminded of the numerous degrading inquiries she and Naruto encountered after returning from their date the night before. But all that aside, Lim, have your breasts grown again? Lim stammered, WWH, what are you saying? She felt uneasy about this. Wow, they really are big, no, huge, Regin and Tita, respectively, made the remarks. Ellen approached her friend with fumbling hands and inquired, "Has Tigra been playing with them every night since you two hooked up?" Lim squeaked, as she attempted to move away, but instead she stepped into the boulder she was leaning against. Ellen said, "Tida, Regin, help me out here," and then sprang into action. Mila, meanwhile, was standing off to the side, away from the now crowd, flushed and very self-conscious of her own chest size. "Does it really make your tits or boobs grow when the person you like or love massages or touches them?" she pondered. "If that is true, I wish Tigra would help me out." Mila's blush rose at that, though it was hard to see. About 100 alsens away under a tree, Tigra and Naruto were sleeping, taking in the sunlight while listening to the noise coming from the hot spring. Naruto, half asleep, said, "Are you certain you don't want to go and save your girlfriend?" Tigra, who was also half asleep, replied, "Nah. I value my life, thank you very much. Besides, from what Lim told me, this is Ellen in a playful mood." Naruto yawned and said, "Hard to argue with you there. But really, do you grope Lim's chest the whole time?" "Nope. I use them as pillows at night. They're so comfortable," replied Tigra. Naruto went on, "And she is your alarm clock at the same time. Tida came up to me yesterday morning, asking me if there was anything wrong with you, you know." "Really?" Tigra said, waking from his slumber. "Yep. She said that you were awake uncharacteristically early on numerous occasions for the past several weeks. She was beginning to wonder if you had found yourself a doppelganger or something." Naruto continued to yawn. Embarrassed, Tigra remarked, "I suppose you could say that if I go to sleep with Lim I find it hard not to sleep without him." "Ah, makes sense," revealed Naruto. "Really?" "Nope," was Naruto's prompt response to Tigra's query. Tigra inquired, "What about you and Ellen?" "She uses me as a body pillow and hugs like a bear," said Naruto. "This one time I had to make a clone and replaced myself with it. Moments later the clone dispelled itself because she was hugging it so hard." Tigra remarked, "That is an incredible amount of power." Simply put, he was relieved that he hadn't chosen Ellen. "You refer to that as power?" Naruto thought, "Boy, you haven't met Sakura or Granny Tsunade," before they both fell asleep once more. The morning after spending the morning in a nearby village, where the ZHCTED people discovered that Brune had roughly as many varieties of cheese as there were Brune villages, the girls were making their way to Tigra's tent. As they entered the tent, they discovered that Tigra was still asleep, on the ground. "He fell asleep before even reaching the tent," said Regin. "You guys were right, he really does look cute when he is sleeping." "True, and I wish we could let him continue sleeping, but right now that is out of the question," Ellen responded. Tida agreed, saying, "True that." Ellen said, "Now, how on earth do we wake him up?" The other girls' expressions conveyed their intense focus. Well, not including Regin. Waking him up is a mission and a half. Earlier we used to wake him up by putting a sword in his mouth, but Tida stopped that," Ellen clarified. "Because if you cut him in the mouth, he won't be able to eat the breakfast I keep on making for him." Tida was furious. Regin debated whether or not she was in the company of ordinary people. They stared at Tigra for a while longer, considering how they might rouse him. They heard someone say, "Hey, guys. What's up?" They turned to see Naruto standing behind them, holding a pot of ramen. "We are talking about how to wake this guy up," Ellen replied. Naruto whispered several instructions into her ear, saying, That is actually the easy part. Lim, come here quickly." Lim questioned, "You sure that this will work?" "If it doesn't, I will stop eating ramen for a week," Naruto replied. With a deadpan tone, Tida, Ellen, Lim, and Mila questioned, "You are that confidant?" Naruto retorted, "Should I make it a month?" Regin thought, "Well, I always knew that Naruto-san was crazy." Lim handed Tida her sword and said, "Tida, hold this for me please." Suddenly, Lim, kneeling over Tigra, released a huge mass of ki. Tigra awoke instantly, threw Lim to the ground, and grabbed his hunting knife, which Lim had shrewdly taken out earlier. When he realized what he was doing, he asked, Lim?" Tida questioned, "Didn't you say that Tigra doesn't grope them?" From their vantage point, Tigra's left hand was resting on Lim's chest as they both looked down. Tigra was beginning to perspire. In the meantime, Lim was scowling at Naruto for enticing her into this predicament. Naruto just said, "Hey, he woke up, didn't he? And seriously, don't tell me you don't like it." Damn, you were right. Embarrassment and anger were all mixed together on Lim's face, which caused the other girls to giggle. As Tigra and Lim rose to their feet, both flushed, Ellen remarked, "Lim should probably train him like I trained Naruto." Lim attempted to regain her stoic demeanor but failed miserably. "Trust me, I have tried to." 1. Mila inquired, "What do you mean?" Regin and Tita were embarrassed by the response, and Mila felt alone. Once things were back to normal as Tita prepared their breakfast, which included a variety of cheeses, meats, and bread that had been, forcibly, purchased from the neighboring villages. The word, forcibly, being used because Tigra refused to accept the food as giving. The others agreed and offered arguments like these when Tigra declared during the meal that he intended to verify whether Regin was who she claimed to be. "If she is indeed the rightful heir, then we truly are fighting for a just cause." Lim. "You won't be branded a traitor any longer, Tita. The people will be more likely to accept your cause than that of Thenardier." Ellen. "Naruto. This war will be over sooner," and so on. Regin explained the technique, describing a grotto beneath Artesium, the former capital of Ganelon. After giving it some thought, Tigra concluded that they would go through the church. Mila started, "As for who of us would go," Ellen told her fellow battle-happy female, "definitely not you. If this is a trap, then we need you up top here to give Thenardier a sound thrashing." Naruto surprised everyone by saying, "Count me out as well." They had anticipated that he would volunteer for a mission of that nature. Ellen and Tigra questioned, "Why?" Naruto gave them an evil smile before saying, "I need to cause some mischief again. And just now one of the clones I sent to spy on Thenardier's army dispelled itself. They're heading north. I may as well offer them a warm welcome." Ellen nodded and said, "And delay their arrival at the same time. From painful experience I know what happens when I forbid you from pulling pranks and such shit, so have fun, and leave some troops for us to fight later." Naruto declared, "I'll try my best not to irritate them all." Ellen drew him close for a kiss before he could get away. A.N. The Holy Grotto events are essentially canon. That day, early in the afternoon, Naruto left the camp and headed quickly in the direction of their last reported location by his clones. Naruto found them quickly after arriving at the scene because he only needed to follow the army's path of destruction. When he arrived, one of his clones, Clone A, exclaimed, "Boss, what the heck are you doing here?" "Time to go and cause some shit amongst their lines," he replied. Clone B, another clone, inquired, "What about El-chan? How did you convince her to let you go?" The original Naruto responded, by promising to leave a few troops for her to fight later on. "But none of our pranks have killed anyone on purpose yet," replied Clone C. Clone D responded, "She doesn't need to know that. So boss, any ideas? Old school or new school?" "Boss." Original Naruto stated, "Let's use some classics and some new stuff." The same malevolent smile was fixed on the faces of all his clones. Both his parents, one of whom was a certified shit-stirrer herself, shivered and huddled together in Naruto's mindscape. Later on in the day, a loud shout erupted among the ranks as the army marched across a field. Entire groups of soldiers were engulfed in plumes of smoke of various colors, which painted them in a stunning combination of sunflower yellow, sky blue, neon green, and cherry blossom pink. As soldiers stepped on glass vials containing mixtures of salt acid and iron sulfate, there were additional cries amid the resulting confusion. 2. Later on, Naruto would characterize the current scene as a foul-smelling mess. There were additional traps. With the assistance of his parents, magnetic tags were made that attracted anything composed of steel or iron. The soldiers felt as though they had entered a high-gravity area when it was placed on the ground. Airburst tags. For some reason, his parents were aware of a feeble and seemingly useless seal made by Jiraiya, whose only function is to turn girls' skirts over so he can see their underwear. Naruto launched itching powder into the air with these. Not all of the pranks, however, were non-physical. Some of them were modified plank pranks. Usually, when someone does this, they step onto one side of the plank, causing the other side to fly up and crash into their face. With this one, the other end would pass up between the legs of the soldier marching ahead of the first one when one soldier stepped on one end. The soldiers began to quarrel with one another as a result. And there were the dangers, another Naruto classic. All of this was simply Naruto warming up. His parents had good reason to be concerned. At that moment, Naruto realized that Thenardier and his bodyguards were not present. Later on in the day, when Naruto reached the Artesium ruins, the city center had been transformed into a huge crater. He and Ellen arrived simultaneously, and they both leapt down to see how the three figures at the bottom were doing. When Naruto noticed Ellen checking on Tigra and Bertrand, he went to the closest one. Wasn't he the right-hand man for the Thénardiers? He reflected to himself. He leapt to Ellen, who was going to see how Bertrand was doing, and shook his head. It was not long before they both found out that he had died. Ellen called for some rope after a little while. In the meantime, Naruto was silently honoring Bertrand, but he allowed himself to cry uncontrollably in his mindscape. Chapter 21. Comeback SMA Camp, evening after the Holy Grotto skirmish. Apart from a few locations, primarily the tents containing the Alsatian soldiers, the commander's tents, and the tent Tigra shared with Lim, though he was the only one there at the moment, the air in the camp was the same as it had always been. The uneaten food on the table next to him and his lifeless eyes would be the first things someone would notice if they walked in. He has suffered a severe emotional blow from Bertrand's passing that he had never experienced before. Meanwhile, in the main command tent, Regin, Moshes, Rurik, Gerard, Mila, Ellen, Lim, and Naruto were seated and talking about Bertrand's life. When Bertrand risked his life and crossed the border, to come and find Tigra, that was when all of this started. Ellen said, "It is because he listened to his voice that Tigra rose up." "Count Roland, if I may be candid, will he be back on his feet again by tonight?" asked Gerard. Moshes was silent for a moment. "Honestly, I don't know." Naruto remarked, "I can relate to Tigra. I have been in a situation similar to his before." "You have?" inquired Mila. Rurik said, "Whom did you lose?" Naruto uttered, "My godfather. He was the last family member I had." As Ellen muttered, Naruto had told her his entire life story, so she understood what he was talking about. Regin inquired, "And how does this relate to Tigra? If nothing is done to help him snap out of his current state, he will completely lose the will to live," said Naruto. "And to be honest, the only ones here who can do that is Lim, Old Man Moshes and Tita, though she may also need a shoulder to cry on." Mila inquired, "And you were in such a state?" "No, I just had a strong case of depression followed by roughly a month-long want for revenge," replied Naruto. "I guess one of the reason I didn't lose my will to live was because I, like many of those in my homeland, were trained from young to accept death as a way of life." Regin remarked, "That is a very grim point of view." Naruto gave a nod of agreement. "It is a point of view that allowed me to survive in battle and on adventures." There was silence once more for a while. "Any ideas as to how we snap Tigra out of his state of mind?" Lim inquired. Naruto remarked, "Only two. Give him a reason to life. The other way is to remind him of what he is fighting for." Lim remarked, "Not very helpful." Naruto sighed, "It is the only thing I can do at the moment. As I said, the only ones capable of snapping Tigra out of his depression are you and Old Man Moshes." Regin remarked, "You mentioned Tita earlier. She may not seem like it, but there is a possibility that she is just as hurt as Tigra is," Naruto stated to her. Regin said, "Any advice for her? I think all she needs is a shoulder to cry on, so how about letting the old man do that and having Lim handle Tigra?" said Naruto. "It would be the best thing to do," the others agreed. Right now, it was the only one they had. 1. Picture her stoic, red-faced expression. 2. This is one method of making a stink bomb, in case you were unaware. This is a great way to skip chemistry class, but please don't try it at home. You can try it at school. Chapter 21. Acknowledgement and Salvation. Lim was able to pull Tigra out of his funk faster than anticipated. She was in Tigra's tent for less than 20 minutes before they left, and the difference was immediately apparent. An intense flame of resolution, rather than retaliation or rage, was burning in Tigra's eyes. "Man, if Shikamaru were here, he'd definitely ask you how you snapped him out of it so fast," Naruto grumbled. Either that or he would say something about troublesome blondes. Once more. Returning to Konoha with a sneeze, Shikamaru blew the board's shogi tiles. His father said, "Difficult, don't want to pick up the pieces, so, draw?" It was too much trouble for Shikamaru to turn down. "And back? Well, I just spoke to him about other things," Lim replied. "Such as?" inquired Naruto. "A trade route running through the mountains connecting Lightmerits and Alsace and by extension, Jekted and Brune," said Tigra. "You know, Ellen, sometimes I wonder just how far ahead you can plan." Ellen answered, "I just take a broad look on things like this." When Tigra heard footsteps approaching, he looked over and saw that the others were coming. As was to be expected, Gerard and Rurik began arguing almost immediately. Mila greeted him, "Glad to have you back, Tigra." The other women gave a nod of approval. Tigra said to them, Thanks. Where's Tita? Naruto responded, I'm being reassured by old man Masha's. When they got to Masha's tent, they discovered Tita dozing off and Masha's seated beside her. As they walked in, he said, I am really getting too old for this. The following day then a man with an absurdly long beard showed up at the camp with a few knights in the royal standard. He introduced himself to Tigra, saying, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Brune, Pierre Badwin, at your service. Ellen was asked in a whisper by Naruto, Pierre Badwin? She had to stifle a laugh. Badwin surprised Regin by referring to her as princess and said, I'm so relieved that you are safe, Princess Regin. I heard everything that has happened from His Majesty. Regin exhaled a sigh of relief. Is that right? Tigra greeted the older man, saying, It is a pleasure to meet you, Prime Minister. Naruto asked Ellen in a whisper, Do all Prime Ministers have huge fish hooks on their face? Ellen responded in a whisper, although she was laughing heartily inside. Naruto, if you don't shut up now, I won't hear what else is being said. Badwin shook his head and said, Oh no, you once accompanied your father to the palace. It had been a while, Sir Tigravormud. Tigra's only answer was, Oh, Masha said, So, what brings you here, Badwin? Everyone was taken aback when Badwin declared, His Majesty, the King, has come around. No one was more shocked than Regin when he said, It appears that he was poisoned by Duke Ganelon. Sir Tigravormud, would you mind telling me what your intentions are? What do you plan to do hereafter? Tigra's reaction was nearly instantaneous. I will fight Duke Thénardier and strike him down. Badwin inquired, And have you any designs on Brune? Tigra said, No, once I have assured the safety of Alsace, I will go to ZHCTED as their prisoner. Ellen nearly yelled, Hold on, I'm sure we can dress that up to sound better. So in other words, after all this he goes where Lim goes, Naruto replied. Tigra remarked, That would be an added benefit. Lim complained, Well, pardon me for being, just a benefit. If you come to Olmutz, I can guarantee you will be welcomed as a guest of honor, Mila replied. When Badwin saw the two friends arguing, he actually smiled before turning back to Tigra. Are you really doing this just to protect Alsace? Asked he. I am. Was Tigra's response. But there is one thing I'd like to say. If it will keep the peace in Alsace, I would not be averse to Alsace becoming a part of ZHCTED. Knowing where Tigra was going with those words, Masha's smiled. Whatever sovereignty the land belonged to, Tigra's heart was and will always be with his people in Alsace. Well then, Badwin, what would you have us do? Asked he. Badwin paused to reflect. At last, he said, Take Her Highness with you and hurry to Nice. His Majesty's life will probably not hold out much longer. Regin was frightened by this. Tigra put his hand on her shoulder to soothe her. Duke Thénardier will probably try to block us from entering the royal capital, he stated. Naruto, growing tired of the meeting, said, Then let's go and kick his ass. Really, man? Inquired Rurik. A few days later. A few leagues from the capital of Nice, on the plains of Maryville, the SMA and Thénardier's army engaged in combat once more. With both sides giving it their all in this decisive battle, it may be regarded as the biggest and bloodiest engagement of the Brune Civil War. Regin, Masha's, and Lim were positioned on a hill with a view of the main battleground. Regin was given command of the SMA, at least in theory, since she was the leader. In actuality, she left the leadership in its proper place and went about questioning whether the lives lost were worth it. While this was going on, Lim and Masha's were pleased that she had stopped griping about the rather revealing armor that they, the leaders, minus Tigra, had made her wear. Although it was just as revealing as her own armor, if not more so, Naruto had questioned whether that specific suit belonged to Ellen or to the purple bitch with the grass-cutting tool. At least it wasn't as skimpy. Meanwhile, Regin could see that the fight was nothing more than a bloody melee. She asked, What is going on? Are Thénardier's troops really this disorganized? No, I think the rumors of Thénardier's main lieutenant dying in the grotto are true, Masha's replied. Lim started, At least that makes it easier for us. But even so, even with his right-hand man dead, Thénardier would still be able to properly lead his troops, unless, Lim, Masha's, and Regin all agreed. Regin started to say, It can't be, but Lim had already started to charge in the direction of the left flank. Alongside Tigra, the entire left flank, including Tigra, Ellen, Naruto, and Mila, were looking down at the lone figure in bulky armor brandishing a huge sword that was at least as big as Durandal. Thénardier, have you come to pay for your crimes to the Brunish crown, to the Brunish people and to Brune itself? Tigra intervened. Though no one responded, Naruto muttered, not to mention he has a really shitty hairstyle and beard, ridiculous-looking armor, and eyes so full of hate that they would have made the Kyuubi show some respect. I could have gone and holed myself up in the capital, but that would only have delayed the inevitable, said Thenardier. I have come to get my revenge and take what is mine by right. Even if I have to torch the land and drive the people away from their homes, I would have succeeded. However, now none of that matters. Although Naruto didn't initially sense the tension, he ended it. Oi, oi. I think that this guy has a screw loose or something, Naruto replied. Thenardier moaned. You dare call me crazy, brat? I am Duke Thenardier, rightful heir to the throne of Brune. Naruto cut in, and the only guy here with a bad hair day, we know. He questioned his friends, Tigra, Ellen, Potato, do either of you want to take him on, or should I do it? Mila gave him a loud shout. Who are you calling a potato? Ellen shook her head, Tigra nodded, prepared his bow, and issued a challenge. Meanwhile, Thenardier, very well, I accept your challenge, traitor, and after I have dealt with you, that blonde brat is next. If you say so, now, where is some ramen for me to eat whilst we enjoy the show? Replied Naruto. With an obviously offensive tone, Thenardier questioned, ramen? That food for peasants? Those around Naruto retreated as a tick mark appeared on his head. Tigra, do me a favor and lose your round so that I can fucking kill this guy, he growled. The archer suggested, how about you and me swap places? I don't care either way. That peasant food eater and you will die either way and those girls will become my slaves. The army's thoughts were a jumble that could be summed up in one sentence. He's going to die now. Ellen said, Naruto, should we give you some space? With yellow pigment beginning to form around his eyes, Naruto replied, yeah. Give us a 50 meters radius will ya? Make it 75 to be safe. Everyone, Ellen yelled, but one of the knights cut her off. The knight yelled, we heard him, and I think the horses will be happy to GTHAFT. Get the hell away from there. The group immediately began to flee. Naruto raised his hand above his head, palm up, and formed a Rasengan. As you are not a coward who ran and hid, I will show my respect to you by finishing you off with one of my strongest techniques. Before charging, Thenardier inquired, you call that puny little ball your strongest technique? In order to avoid the attack, Naruto simply leapt as high into the air as he could before starting to feed the Rasengan a lot more chakra, which caused it to grow quickly. With the onlookers Mila and Ellen gaped at the rapidly expanding orb in Naruto's hand, which was now larger than him. What the, they said. Ellen, what is this? It had better not be the technique he used against the dragons a while ago. Mila was almost shouting. We are nowhere near far enough for that. I see no why he asked for an area this large, said Tigra. Ellen asked abruptly, hey, Mila, is your dragon gear also shivering? Mila questioned, what? Before noticing something. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Naruto is back. After reaching the top of his leap, Naruto began to descend toward the ground, making his way directly to Thenardier. He said, Ninpo. In a language that no one could comprehend, he concluded with, Sho Odama Rasengan, before abruptly accelerating his respectable, plus backdraft. He was using wind thrusters at the soles of his feet, as Ellen could see. She yelled, hey, that technique is mine, damn copycat. The explosion's roar, followed by Thenardir's roar of agony and Naruto's cries for him to die, drowned out what she had to say. Close by Lim saw a huge dust cloud rising from the battlefield as he ascended a nearby hill. She also noticed that the entire left flank was concealed by a wall of ice close to the blast source, and she noticed the group's recognizable pink mop of hair, which made her heart race. She urged her horse to run at a high speed. By the time she got there, the dust had subsided, and the huge crater still astounded her. Naruto was standing in the middle of it, his clothes completely torn, and Thenardier was lying at his feet, his armor in even worse shape than Naruto's. Hey, Ellen, Mila said. Then Ellen jolted out of her reverie, What? Mila went on, I forbid you from learning that technique. Ellen retorted, would you try learning it if Lavia's told you not to? 'Cause Arifar is telling me the same thing. Pav shift to third person. Thenardier's soldiers lost their will to fight after hearing the news of their defeat, which spread like wildfire across an oil-soaked field. Meanwhile, the SMA's knights and soldiers were yelling triumphant battle cries. When Regin heard the news, he was relieved that the fighting was at last ending. Minutes later, she received the news that Tigra had proposed to Lim and she had accepted, which made her heart sink a little for some reason. Moshes, in the meantime, laughed and said that it was about time. Later on, the king's chambers, 1, 2, Naruto said, "Hey BB-chan," to Sophia. Yes, was her response. Is there any good place here in Nice where I can take Ellen out on a date? Asked Naruto. Blinking, Sophia was unable to understand Naruto's meaning of date, but she quickly figured it out. She gave him a list of upscale eateries and public baths that he could take her to after saying, "Of course there is." Additionally, she informed him of a nearby village with ramen stands and hot springs. At this point, Naruto made the decision to go on his date. In Light Merits, Naruto was ordering some ramen while seated at a little stand. "I didn't know that someone like you likes ramen this much," the cook replied. Naruto inquired, "Are you new here?" The man did not raise his head from his work as he responded, "Yeah, just arrived in Light Merits last week. Before that I worked in Legnitsa." Naruto said, "Oh, good to know. What brings you here? I want to spread the food of the gods that is ramen to other people." The individual responded. The chef turned to face Naruto as he asked, "Food of the gods, old man? Now you are speaking my language." The chef, pleased to have a loyal customer already, grinned and returned to work with renewed energy.
So this was the end of the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, we weeb offline.